Are we sitting comfortably? Good evening, everyone. Can I welcome you to this meeting of the Scrutiny panel? Our function is to scrutinise the decisions of the council insofar as they should be seen to be compliant with the budget set by council, and the strategic plan set by council, and accord with common sense. No practice evacuations planned for this evening, but if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase, on the back staircase to the high street, and then to the car park behind the town hall where you can be accounted for. This meeting is being broadcast live over the internet on the council's website and will also be available to listen to afterwards. A discreet use of mobile phones and other devices is welcomed, but you are requested to set them to silent and not use voice or camera flash functions. We'll be breaking at 7:30 if the meeting is not concluded by that time. Introductions. I'm Dennis Willits, Chairman of the Scrutiny Panel, Councillor for Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Sue Lissymore, Prettigate Ward.
Councillor Darius Laws, Rural Ward North.
Michael Lee, Old Heath Hive and Rowhedge.
Lee Scordis, Old Heath Hive, Rowhedge.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, Shrub End.
Councillor Paul Smith, Anson St John's.
Owen Hell, Democratic Services Officer.
Richard Block, Senior Management Team Support for the panel.
Thank you, colleagues. Substitutions. I think we're all here this evening in person. Urgent items, none have been reported to the chairman. Declarations of interest. No declarations. Minutes of the meeting 7th of June. Is it your wish that they be signed as the correct record? Thank you. We then move on to the general have your say. And the first speaker on general have your say is Alan Short. If you'd like to come forward, you're an old hand at this, Alan, so you know the rules when the bell sounds, etc.
Good evening, everybody. I'm here to talk about, or to request, feels a bit like Dragon's Den really, an inquiry into the handling of the whole alumno affair. I was promised such an inquiry by our MP, Will Quince, and also by the last leader of the Colchester Borough Council prior to the election. I think that this is the committee that should handle that inquiry using the powers that it has, and I've read your terms and conditions and you're full well within there. We need to remind ourselves that this started with a tiny little amendment to the local plan in 2014, and the addition of the phrase "with and student accommodation." I've searched high and low myself, and with the help of the Democracy Department in the council, and we cannot find where that decision was taken, who made the decision, on what basis. And it ended twofold, with the council, or the cabinet on behalf of the council, taking powers under draconian 1973 legislation called the Ransom Act, designed to stop recalcitrant landowners and residents from restricting the development that was in the interest of the public, to, in fact, the reverse. The act being used to threaten those who lived at the north end of the site or had businesses there, including a property which we sold to the business, telling them that they would have free and unfettered access to the rear of their property. And this was designed to stop access for 2 years, and then after that to provide only limited access to those premises. Finally ended with a discussion with the county council, where the Borough Council decided to sell the land. There are a whole host of issues, of things that happened, from the failure of the planning committee to take minutes of its meetings with Alumno, accusations of collusion, decisions that happened with Amphora Trading, and its arm's length relationship was so arm's length that they would be longer than the American tennis player who's 6'8" tall, when he said 8'6" tall. We don't know what happened. The agreement that was signed, I'm led to believe that the brief given in November by the cabinet bore very little relationship to the agreement that was signed hurriedly on the 27th of February, before the planning committee rejected the whole thing. I understand that agreement, just want to say one more thing, I understand that agreement contained a clause which required the cabinet to vote in a certain way if certain things happened. So I think that the whole thing needs to have a drains up to see what we did wrong, and how we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Thank you. Listening to the presentation, the panel has to decide, is there anything that you're presenting to us which would suggest the decision making was contrary to the council's budget agreed by council, or the strategic plan agreed by council? And although you may disagree with some of the decisions that were taken and how they were taken, I think it would be difficult to show that these decisions were contrary to the strategic plan or the budget. Nevertheless, you raise some interesting issues which probably are within the remit of the panel and its overview of the operations of the council. But it is not clear to me at the moment that there is an issue which has to be or would need to be looked at. What I will do is, under the work programme, later at the end of the meeting, I will ask my colleagues around the table whether they believe this is an item which should be added to the work programme. If the majority view is that it is an item that should be added, then that will be done. If the view of the panel, taken on a majority, is that the time has passed, this is not something where we can actually add value to the process of the council, then we regret we can do further, but nothing further. So we will add it to we'll discuss it in the work programme. The panel itself has no powers or duties in regard to the things that you're talking about. They are decisions by the cabinet. So you would have to ask the cabinet for a response rather than for the scrutiny panel to respond. Yes.
Yes, so this sounds very familiar to me, because I chaired this was called the Finance and Audit Scrutiny Panel. I chaired the panel that looked into First Sight, or the VAF, whatever you wanted to call it, and what happened there. So I'm not quite sure how how this panel is different from the old Finance and Audit Scrutiny panel, but I certainly think it's something that I would support that we investigate here.
We will discuss it under the work programme and see whether there is any appetite to carry out a review. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a little unclear because at some of the timescales I remember the Cabinet, I'm a little unclear as to exactly what is being suggested that needs to be investigated, because clearly if it's something that's being investigated whilst I was a member of the Cabinet, then there would be a conflict of interest potentially there. If it was a question as to what my actions were, I hate to use the phrase, I don't recall any of the specific items that were raised there, but looking at the timeline, but I'm unclear. The earliest part of it was within the timeline when I was a member of the Cabinet. So I would seek some guidance from you, Chair, as to exactly what we're looking at. We're looking at a period post that period, then I can obviously participate. If it's looking at the period prior to my not being a member of the Cabinet, there would be a potential conflict of interest.
Well, the panel has not decided it's going to look at this issue yet. If it is, it would be in a very general sense, I believe. The fact that you were portfolio, but there were several members around the table who've been taking collective cabinet responsibility for decisions over the years, and you could probably put that argument, but I think one would not wish to disqualify anyone from a member of the panel from considering these issues if the panel so wishes, until we've actually decided what we want to do, if anything. So it may be, but we'll see. Any other points before we ask Mr. Short to exercise his 1 minute to sum up?
Yes, there are a number of issues, particularly related to budget. If the agreement had not been signed on the 27th of February 2019, which I think you were still on the Cabinet at the time, weren't you? Whether you've gone, and that date in 2019, then Alumno would have been unlikely to have tried to mount an appeal. I mean, I can't say that they wouldn't, but that if the Cabinet had said no, we're not going to let you have the land on these circumstances, then it would have been difficult for them to push an appeal when they didn't have access to the land. But the land, they were granted access to the land under that agreement, which I maintain never went to the Cabinet to be seen before it was signed. It was signed on the evening of the Planning Committee, and it then triggered a very expensive appeal, which the council had to fund. I think that there's also a number of other issues, like we don't know what the deal was that was finally agreed between Colchester Borough Council and the Essex County Council, so we don't know whether that has any impact. We tried to get the cost that the council had spent on the land in preparation for Alumno taking over, and how much they'd wasted, and we didn't get any of that either. So there's a need to have a drains, in my view, on the whole economics of it.
Thank you. Now, I reiterate the point. The fact that you disagree with the decision doesn't necessarily mean it was taken in an incorrect or improper manner. Some of the issues you raise, as Mr. Block has just pointed out, are probably within the jurisdiction of the monitoring officer. But I think we will take a quick view at the end of the meeting and decide whether this is an issue we want to look at further, or whether we are happy, from the knowledge we have at the moment, that the decisions were correctly taken, even if some people disagree with the decisions that emerged.
Thank you. I shall wait to discover your decision.
Councillor Sunnox, you're speaking in the general part. And for this purpose, you're Mr. Sunnox, not councillor. So you only get 3 minutes, I'm afraid.
Okay. Yes, what I want to talk about is the collection of Section 106. We hear quite a lot about the distribution of Section 106, but I think there's something very inconsistent and weak about the way we're collecting the money. And although the examples that should get this on the table are backward looking, I think our approach needs to be forward looking. We need to concentrate on getting this right for future deals where when the horse is bolted, there's no point in tormenting ourselves about it. But I'm going to mention some three past deals where I think things are just incomprehensibly inconsistent. And there might be an explanation for it, but it just looks bad. The first one I want to mention is in West Mersey, where there were two sites. One was in the plan, one was not in the plan. The application for the site that was in the plan came forward, and it was about £5,000 a house of Section 106, according to my valuation that was charged, that was agreed. The one that wasn't in the plan came forward, and first of all, officers asked for about 19,000 per dwelling. In other words, they were using Section 106, so just throwing the book at them. And then that application was appealed, and that they settled on a lower figure, but it wasn't a subject of appeal. I don't think it would have stood up at appeal, but that's really an awful lot of money. The difference between 19,000 and 5,000 pounds a house being subject to negotiation without any particular public scrutiny or anything. So, that would be one example. There would be others. Second one I'd like to mention is Great Hawksley Manor, where it appears that the Section 106 was agreed at outline planning stage without any health contributions being collected. And lo and behold, we find that popping up again with 20 extra houses on the site and some type of acknowledgement from the developer that health contributions are needed. Next one, sorry. Were you complaining that I haven't been cut short? The next one is Great Tay, where there's New Barn Road went forward. That one, Lewis and I have dug into, and we've found that there's no education contributions. It's really quite a lot of money, the education contributions. Turns out that Essex County Council didn't ask for it, despite the local school being expanding and needing the money. Desperately needing the money, and everyone's terribly upset that Essex County Council didn't even ask for it. How did that happen? I know it's not our fault, we can pass bucks on, but there's something really, really wrong in this. I hope that you don't try and say, oh, it's not part of the budget or anything, and that you do look at this. It affects the future as well as the past.
Thank you for your contribution. If I can just go into the bureaucracy of how the panel works, and everyone needs bureaucracy to make life tenable. If a member of the council wishes to have an item considered by the panel, and there sounds merit in what you were just presenting, a member of the panel under item 9 on the agenda can ask verbally for a matter to be considered, and we have a short debate about it and decide. If any other member of the council who is not a member of the panel wishes the panel to look at an issue, correct me if I get it wrong, it is necessary for that member to make a brief note to the clerk about why they wish it to be considered, and presumably the presentation which you've just given would probably suffice. And then the panel at its next meeting considers requests made by councillors under item 9B of that meeting. So is that the correct way to handle this matter?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, so thank you for your presentation. Clearly there's some issues that are worrying that you've presented to us. If you wish the panel to carry out a formal review, there needs to be a note to the clerk, which we will consider at our next meeting. Councillor Lilly, who wants to go first?
Thank you, Paul. I was, when you mentioned it, it's an issue that's been going on for years as a member of the planning committee. We often look through it and we want to get as much 106 money to areas as possible that need it, especially in the parish areas. And it annoys us as committee members that there's been no education money asked for. And you just think, well, why not? Surely we could have something.
Councillor Lilly, we are not debating the matter now.
Oh, okay, I was just agreeing with
we've heard a presentation from Councillor Sunnox. There is a formal procedure to go through to get this added to the agenda. Now, if your remarks are about the procedure or the speed, or if you want an extra panel meeting to consider it, then by all means speak up now. But other than that, we are just considering a have your say item, which could be considered further under item 9.
Okay, fair enough. So I agree exactly with what Councillor Sunnox has said, and I'll be happy to see them come to explain it. But they might have done a few years ago, actually. I think we have asked, but there we are.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. To help people like myself who've recently been elected to the council, perhaps if it was to be raised by one of the members of the panel at this meeting under section 9A, we could then progress it then. And if that's agreeable to them, I'll raise it and ask Councillor Sunnox to present on my behalf, if that's okay.
Yes. I mean, that is quite acceptable. But again, we will be just looking at the issue of whether it should be considered by the panel, not going through the full debate this evening, because we don't have a report, we don't have an officer's report, and I suspect there is a lot to be said about this subject, which we need to have on the table before we have a proper scrutiny debate on this issue. But yes, a quick canter through if any member wishes to raise it under 9A, and if they don't, I'm sure Councillor Sunnox will be raising it formally under 9B. So let's thank Councillor Sunnox, Mr. Sunnox, for presenting it under the general have your say.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll be there.
Oh yes, you can have 1 minute apparently to.
Well, the one thing I'll follow the procedure as suggested by Councillor Smith. The way looking at this is actually a fairly simple job for officers. They need to get out the Essex County Council Developers Guide. It has a list in there of all the contributions that should be done, and then choose, I'd say, no more than half a dozen developments, larger ones, and tick down the list as to where, have we asked for everything we should, and then try and understand why we haven't done. There'll be reasons why we haven't asked for that. Not trying to hold anyone to roast anyone, and then we need to see how we can cure those problems in the future.
Thank you for your contribution. Clearly, it's galvanising the scrutiny panel into action. One can see the brains processing already. So thank you for your contribution. Am I correct in thinking Mr. Chilver's items both relate to items on the agenda?
That's the case, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, decisions taken under special urgency provision, there are none. Item 8, cabinet or portfolio holder decisions called in for review, there have been none. So that brings us on to the item 9, which we've just been talking about. 9A, to evaluate requests by members of the panel. Councillor Smith, I see one coming along.
Indeed you do, and I will ask my colleague Councillor Sunnox to present. I think he'll be very brief because I believe the panel are already well versed on this subject.
Yes, I think it would be most useful to hear what the panel have to say, and I very much want to use any time you can give me to respond to that. I think I've said what I need to say initially.
Colleagues, I'm asking your opinion now. Councillor Smith has proposed under 9A that we consider the matter of the 106 agreements. Does anyone wish to add anything to the deliberation of whether we place this on a future work programme? Councillor Lilly.
Do you want to bring all 106 agreements or just the education one?
I think we should go through the list, the Essex County Council's developer guide. We should list out all the things in there, and then we should go tick, tick, tick down to see, like an auditor, which is where I started my career. Tick, 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 which ones have we collected, which ones not collected, and then we should ask questions about why we haven't collected the ones that have been looked at. We should try and be forward looking, not backwards looking. It's really important to keep a positive approach to it.
Yeah, because it says county council in the planning process, as we know, application goes to the county council, and they asked about highway matters and about education matters as well, and they'll look at it, and if there's nothing there, they can't expand or anything like that. They won't ask for anything. So it's out of our hands. Recently, in plan application, we deferred an item because we thought they might have missed it because there was no education application. They went back and come back and said no, they just don't feel there's enough there to ask for it. But yeah, just because there's a big subject, and also when parish councils are involved, they have a neighbourhood plan or a local plan. They'll want some 106 money already allocated to other areas. So I was just wondering where if nobody claims that money from parishes, the council takes it and uses it on our projects. But I'm happy to do it all, Chair, but just want to make it clear where we are.
Okay. Although the issue has been raised in the context of money for schools, if there are problems with money for schools, there are probably problems with other areas. And shall we ask our officers to prepare a report for us on the workings of the 106 agreements, their estimate of the amount that we're collecting in as perhaps the percentage of the total amount which we should be aiming to collect in as community contributions. And then there may be other issues. Clearly, I think we leave it to the discretion of the officers to produce a report which starts to address the issues that we've been hearing this evening, without saying it is just going to be schools or it is just going to be health. I think we need to look across the whole board, and then we maybe then we drill down into particular areas if the officer's report gives us continued concern about certain activities of collection. Councillor Smith, you looked as though you wanted to.
Thank you. Yes, I do think the idea about using the Essex guideline and suggested a sample of applications so we can see, did we ask for them? If there was a good reason why we didn't ask for them, or we asked for them and someone said we didn't need it, parish council said we've got everything we need, we don't want it, that would be absolutely fine. But given that council has raised concerns that we could be missing out on some revenue here, I think we should check it. And if we find that we're doing everything right, fantastic. And if we're missing a bit of money.
So is it your wish that this item be referred to officers for a report as soon as possible? Thank you, colleagues, for that decision. So that is now what will happen, Councillor Sonics.
I think that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for addressing us this evening. Are there any other items under 9A? We have no written items under 9B, no requests under 9B. That takes us on to the first substantial item on the agenda, which is the council tax rebate. And if I can just outline the history, Councillor Smith asked us to look at this some time ago to ensure that the maximum amount of money was being distributed to those who were eligible and in need. We have Councillor Corey and Sam Preston presenting The report is before you on page 15. So who's going first, Councillor Corey or Sam?
Yeah, I'm happy to say something for 1 minute if my sound quality is good enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have only just recently taken on the portfolio with this scheme rolling out. And I wanted to thank the team for the work done so far. You can see in the paper how much has been completed, especially a very high amount of payouts through the direct debit schemes. And Sam will explain how we're getting money out to those with the non-direct debit accounts. And also an important part of the paper this evening and discussions that Sam and the team and I will carry out are about the discretionary scheme going forward and the different priorities we give to that. But essentially the biggest priority for both Sam, the team and I is to get as much of the money out or all of the money out to all of our residents in the quickest and best way possible. I'll pass over to Sam now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just quickly run through the report and then of course take any questions. So as you'll be aware, the announcement came in February that they would be offering all residents in council tax properties bands A to B £150, and that's to support them with the increasing fuel costs. We knew quite quickly at that point that this was going to be quite a difficult task. We started by going through the data, trying to identify those that would be eligible. The government made it clear in the beginning that those paying by direct debit would be the first to receive the grant. We established that there were just over 64,000 properties that would be eligible. There were just over 48,000 paying by direct debit at that point, so we appointed a campaign just to make sure that people were signing up if they did want the credit quickly. Sorry, the sound sounds bad to me, so please do tell me if I need to stop, but I'll continue until I'm told to stop. So we worked to gather all of that information. The main issue that we had at that point was that the system isn't built to pay out money, it's built to collect money, so our system provider had to then create a process whereby we could do that. That system release was only done in May. We then had to test it and make sure that everything could work properly in order to make the payment correctly. We did work really quickly to do that, and we sent out just over 48,000 payments within that week. Then we also had to consider those that weren't paying by direct debit. So we started creating an online form so that people could complete it, providing their bank details, or they could choose for credit onto their account. That was launched as quickly as possible. We sent out emails and letters to everyone who didn't already have a direct debit payment, so that was just over 15,000 residents. We had a good response to that, so we had 7,300 applications completed at the point of writing the report. I know that we've had around 1,000 since then. The process for those payments is far more complex. We have to go through significant verification, firstly to make sure that we're not duplicating anything, that the bank details are correct, that they are eligible, and we also have to follow the government's process using what's called the Spotlight tool. So when we initiated that process, of the 5,500 that wanted the payment to bank account, immediately several thousand fell out of that. We've worked very quickly to then correct any accounts that we can, but it does mean that we then sent out 3,300 payments. So I guess that's just an example of how many fall through this process. We're working quickly to resolve those issues, but it's not always clear what the issue is. It could be that the bank details don't match the council tax account, but in some cases through the Spotlight tool, it's not clear. So we are having to manually go into each of those accounts. The process for crediting account, again, is complex. We're working on that as quickly as we can. That's the next priority. We've got around 1,800 that we want to process in the next couple of weeks on that. We do have to consider what we'll do for those that haven't completed the form. We'll be writing out to them again to try and encourage them to come forward. We do have people available to help people complete the form over the phone, so we're making sure that anyone without access to a computer or the internet can get that support. But we'll also take a view as to whether we then credit all of the accounts where we have not had contact. That doesn't mean that they can't receive the money directly to bank account. It just means that we make sure that they get the rebate before the scheme closes. So it could be that we then look to try and refund those accounts back into a bank. The second part of the scheme is the discretionary scheme. So we have been allocated £318,000 for that scheme. Initially, we created a policy that is quite there's not a lot of detail in there, so essentially we're targeting those who receive LCTS or those in financial hardship within bands E to H, and that's just to make sure that we're supporting those that aren't eligible for the main scheme. There's around 250 accounts that currently receive LCTS. We've got around just over 2,000 payments that we can give out, and we've only had around 90 applications under the hardship scheme. So as Councillor Corey's mentioned, we're now reviewing our options around how we can widen that scheme. We would like to look to open it up to council tax bands A to D to offer people a top up, so an extra payment, and particularly around hardship. So again, we'll be looking to take applications and also targeting comms to those groups where we know they're potentially going to need that extra support. We also want to give automatic awards where people have been found eligible for other financial assistance. So for instance, if they've had a discretionary hardship payment. And that, I think, was all I was going to say. So if anyone's got any questions, please do.
Thank you. That was a bit heavy going at times because we're clearly the audio is not too good at our end, but I think everything you said was intelligible. But I may have missed one issue, and that was crystal ball gazing. How many eligible people have we not yet managed to winkle out? Now, I know it's a really difficult question to answer because we don't know where they are or who they are. It's difficult to say how many, but do you have a feel for how many people who are eligible have not yet been in touch with your department? Just a rough estimate if you have one.
Yeah, that's fine. So I would say around 8,000. The team has been very, very busy. We've seen an awful lot of phone calls, emails. We have to work through those, but I think there's around 8,000 people that we still need to make contact with to make sure that they either fill out the form or understand that they'll be credited on their account.
And are we going to use all the funds available? Because I'm sure what the people of Colchester don't want is to hear that at the end of the day we're giving money back to government.
Yes, so that's why we're looking at this option around crediting account. It would mean that, as long as the data is correct and that we've found people within the system that are eligible, we'll make sure that they have that money either as a credit or as a payment.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much. I'm very impressed at the work that's been done here, but obviously I'm concerned that there is, if there's 8,000 people at 150 at a time, £1.2 million in benefits that are not being claimed. And I congratulate you on your suggestions as to what you want to do with it to ensure we don't pay it back. I wonder whether panel would like to make that as a recommendation to the Cabinet that they do indeed look to make the payments into the accounts to ensure they aren't missed. And also, as it looks like there's going to be a surplus in the discretionary scheme for the bands E to H, again, to redirect the surplus from that to hardship cases as well. So again, to make sure that Colchester residents get the full benefit of the funds the government have provided.
Yeah. Can I ask what the exact position is on that? Because in paragraph 4.6, clause 3, it says modelling is now being completed to target the scheme to vulnerable groups and consider opening the scheme, that's the discretionary scheme, to top up those in bands A to D within certain groups. So taking Councillor Smith's point, what part of that, in any, is already covered by that particular statement?
So we are progressing through the data. I think the main issue that we've got is that some of the groups we would like to target, there are too many people and there wouldn't be enough money. So what we're going to look at is where we've clearly got enough money to support those who have received a DHP, discretionary housing payment, or an exceptional hardship payment. And then we would look to target the comms out to the other groups. So, for instance, those in receipt of a disability benefit.
Councillor Smith, are you happy with the answer?
I'm very happy about the process. I was wondering whether the portfolio holder would think it would be helpful if we made that recommendation, or whether we're just asking the portfolio holder to do something which he was going to be doing anyway.
Councillor Corey, can you answer Councillor Smith's point?
Absolutely, Chair. It may help if you could mute the grand jury room piece on the Zoom. Just that helps with the feedback. Thank you. So yes, I mean, I'd happily take the recommendation, but that is exactly what we are going to do. So Sam explained that our best fallback position is to credit everybody's account to ensure that we get the money to them. We weren't able to do that with the government guidance originally. Otherwise, you'd think, well, let's do that originally. But the government did not want to do that. It was the last resort. So we are doing as much as we can, but as a last resort, we would do that. We would credit accounts to ensure the money goes to the people of Colchester, and we get as much money out as possible. All of the money. That's what we did with the business rate relief. That's what we will do again now. The second point about hardship, Sam has explained, but we will go through looking for those in the most hardship, those who we've supported before because they're receiving discretionary housing payments or exceptional hardship funds. So we will target the money as best as we can, and we could definitely spend it over and again. So we will use it up. So it's absolutely clear from me and clear from Sam and the team that we want to make sure all of the money is allocated. And with the original point, we will. So I'm happy to take the recommendation, but that is something we will be doing. We will be crediting the accounts as our fallback position that we believe we can now do because we've tried all other options. The final point I'd say is I have offered to Sam to do further comms, and Sam is working with the comms team to ensure we get every piece of comms we can out about this to make sure we cover everybody. But with council comms, you all know, sometimes we just miss some of those hard to reach groups. We'll do everything we can to get to them. And as I've said, I'll say it again, we will credit accounts as the fallback position.
I think the issue here is looking at the tense of some of those statements. If it is being done already, then it would be superfluous of us to pass a resolution. If, on the other hand, it's something which is being considered, and I think you use the future tense on several occasions during that presentation, if it is not yet being done, then the panel may wish to make a recommendation just to ensure that you know our view on an event which is still to be decided, although I'm sure we'll know which way you go with this particular action. So is it being done yet, or is it something which is not yet being done but still being considered?
Thank you, Chair. So I've agreed with Sam that will be our way forward. But I think, Sam, if you can explain the difference between how quickly we're going to be doing that, whether that is tomorrow or in a few weeks, then, Chair, you might want to take it from there. But I am saying to you now, it is the decision that we will guarantee we credit accounts. We just had to go through the other motions as the guidance from the government said. But Sam, please take over from here.
Yeah, that's right. So we, the government guidance is clear that credit should be a last resort and not the first option. So we do want to try and contact people and make them, you know, aware of what they can choose, that they can choose a payment into bank account or as a credit. But we will be doing credits if they don't come forward. And in terms of the changes to the discretionary scheme, we've had the conversation today, so we are comfortable with the proposals. I just want to check whether it needs to go through any governance process, because the original policy was taken through a portfolio holder report. So I just need to check that we're able to amend it without going through that process. And if we can, we could start that tomorrow. But I'll double check.
Vice Chairman, you wish to speak?
Yes, all I wanted to say really was I was the cabinet member when this was introduced, and when Sam heard about this, she must have just thought, how are we going to do this? So again, I emailed Sam a while ago, but just again publicly thank her and her team for an absolutely magnificent job that they have done, because this was unprecedented. This had never happened before, and as Sam rightly said right at the beginning, we're used to taking money from residents, not giving it back to them. So it was something that was very new and very innovative. She has worked with her team incredibly hard, and it is amazing that we have got as far as we have got at the moment. As an example, I had a resident contact me a few weeks ago, so I haven't received my money, and they'd not received it because their council tax account was in a different name to what they'd forgotten to change. It was in her maiden name and she'd forgotten to change it, and it'd been a good few years and she'd forgotten that it had been changed. So where you have little discrepancies like that, we have to be an absolute 100% sure that that money is getting to the right people. We cannot get this wrong. So again, a huge thanks to Sam and her team. Please thank your team, because you have done a magnificent job in a very short period of time. So thank you.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hi, Sam. Hi, Mark. I just want to very, very briefly move away from the report, if I may, Chair, if I can do such a thing, and zone in on one particular resident who got in touch with me today. I'm pleading a bit of ignorance here. I just need a bit of signposting. So the resident got in touch and believes that they should be in Band D, as their property, as a neighbour is rather, and their property is considerably smaller than the rest of the properties on this particular street, and this particular street otherwise is in Band E. They believe they've been paying too much and are entitled to the A to D rebate. In fact, they could be very well be entitled to the discretionary scheme, but equally do not wish to continue paying more than they believe they should be. How do I go about signposting the resident to the right place, seek some advice on this? Basically, where's the best place for the resident to make contact? Are they best to complete the discretionary form and go from there, or should they get in contact with someone directly to kind of, yeah, I'll leave it there, Chair. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Sam.
I trust
Thank
Councillor
you.
McCarthy can be advised of the procedures outside this meeting, if that's okay. It's essential that we get good feedback and good advice from our officers on how to deal with constituents. But it's not a scrutiny panel issue, but I think it's something we all need to know. And I'm really keen to know how I reduce my mansion to a Band A, and but I don't think it will work. So we've heard what's going on. We've heard that that there is future action to ensure that we have maximum distribution. And I think it's really down to you, Councillor Smith. You proposed this item in the first place. You've heard what is being proposed by the portfolio holder. Do you wish to proceed with a recommendation to Cabinet? I will certainly support you if you do. If, on the other hand, you think that everything is in safe hands, then so be it.
I'm very happy with what I've heard from the portfolio holder and Sam. I've seen no problems with their assurances. I just wonder, given that the government said we should only make the payments as a last resort, whether it would help if we recognised that they have already taken considerable steps to try and make the payments directly to the individuals, but as a last resort, we fully support them in doing that. But whether that needs to be a formal recommendation or not, I will happily leave to your judgment, or whether we just record it in minutes so that if the government ever wants to complain about it, we can say we've looked at it, and I think we're all quite content that they have done a great deal of work to make sure that they've tried to pay the money out. But if they can't pay it out, then crediting someone's account so they get the benefit of it sounds absolutely right to me.
As our senior advisor on to the panel, do you think this is an area where a recommendation would serve a useful purpose, or would we just be telling the cabinet how Granny sucks eggs?
I think the way that Councillor Smith framed the recommendation would certainly have merit in terms of giving the cabinet that cover that you've scrutinised this item, scrutinised the activity undertaken as recommended by the government in the initial steps, and that you are now confident, having scrutinised it in detail, that we should move to the next stage in the process. I think that will certainly give a layer of protection and security.
Thank you. In that case, I so move.
Is it your wish that that we forward a recommendation to cabinet tomorrow in the terms just set out, started off by Councillor Smith and put into decent language by or cabinet ease by Mr. Block? Is that your wish? Thank you. We will do so. Can I thank Sam and Councillor Corey for joining us? Sorry the audio wasn't better. I don't think we quite solved the problem of the remote meetings in this room yet, and I will certainly be suggesting that the technical team take another look at it. We now move on to item 11, which you find on page 19, which is the year end to April 2021 to March 2022 performance report on the key performance indicators and other performance news, where Mr. Block will be reporting.
Thank you, Chair, and we also have Councillor King, who's the portfolio holder for this area, who may want to contribute. Members of the panel who have been previously on scrutiny will be familiar with this report. It's the look backwards at last municipal year's performance against the council's key performance indicators. These are important indicators that have been selected in terms of the key services provided to members of the public by this council, and this is the opportunity to review how our services have been delivered against those particular indicators. You'll see that the report's coming to you prior to Cabinet, when the performance will also be considered. You'll also see in the report a clear identification of those key performance indicators where there are red performance, i.e. performance below the target key performance indicator levels, and these are listed at 5.7. I wouldn't propose to go through them in detail, taking the report's been read, and you'll see where that performance is below the level that we've set targets for. It's fair to say that last year was a year partially impacted still quite severely by the COVID pandemic in terms of our services, and this is largely the main cause for the performance being red. As I say, I'd stress this to look backwards. The panel will also get an opportunity to review this year's performance at the mid-year level, and also a chance to pre-scrutinise the proposed key performance indicators for next year. I'd leave it there and take any questions. Thank you.
Does Councillor King, as portfolio holder, wish to add anything?
Chair,
welcome, Councillor King.
Thank you. Thank you. I always used to love going to scrutiny. It's safer from a distance, I think I'd say. On this item, as on the balance of these pieces, I really would only echo, Chair, what's been said, and it's no disrespect to the officers or to the previous administration to say it was very difficult times for our workforce and for our residents, and it shows itself in the performance. You can be assured that we'll be looking really closely at emerging improvement or not in the next few months. I've got a set of things I will want to pay attention to as well, Cabinet, on our collective council, full council behalf. And not least, I have a concern personally about health, because that drives availability, and that in turn drives the performance of we can offer to our residents. But that will be for your half yearly report, and I'll be very much on that at that time. But at this point, it's just to acknowledge, in my view, where we are, and I give you my assurance that we're on this in terms of trying to learn the lessons we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. I'm sure with your attention to detail, we will see significant improvements. Now, of course, this is a backward look at the moment, and there are effectively 5 old favourites which have come up before the panel several times during the COVID epidemic, because that they are issues which have been made difficult or exacerbated by the COVID issue, and they have been discussed thoroughly in detail in the past, but we have some members on the panel at the moment who were not here with us last year, and they may wish to make comments. So I'll just call out the items so that we have a structured debate. Does anyone want to speak on the target or the achievements for affordable homes? Councillor Scordis.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, this is quite a significant drop-off, and I'm wondering what powers we have as a council to take action on developers, because when they are given that permission, there are expectations to meet, and it is disappointing that affordable housing is obviously seen as below the private housing stock. So it'd be interesting to see what powers we've got, or what powers we've taken, or relationships we're building to achieve a target close to what we need.
And of course, we will be looking at the housing strategy in a few minutes. Do we have an instant answer to Councillor Scordis's question? Yeah, but it's suggested that we answer that under, we look at that under the housing strategy item. Any further comments on affordable homes? Average time to relet, where we had an excellent presentation by Colchester Borough Homes on why it was taking longer. Any additional questions on that? Councillor Scordis again.
Yes, sorry, Chairman. When I was previously on this panel, this has always been a real issue with Colchester Borough Homes. And obviously they've highlighted some of the reasons this time, but this has always been a consistent issue. And I'm wondering what lessons we've learnt over the last 5 years on this, of why it's become an issue, what are the struggles we're coming up against, and what do we need to do better, and what are we doing better to resolve this?
Mr. Block.
Yeah, I can certainly answer, particularly for last year, why things were particularly bad, and this was due to the fact that we were taking a far greater time to actually process for evictions because of the protections offered rightfully during the COVID pandemic, which meant that where houses were falling into a really bad state, they were actually getting into far worse state than in previous years, and that was certainly the explanation that was given by Colchester Borough Homes when they came before the panel. The panel will get an opportunity to again talk to Colchester Borough Homes when they come along to discuss their performance on behalf of the council, and perhaps at that point it would be a good question to ask how things are going this year against this KPI, and what's been learnt from previous years.
Any other questions on that item? Well, then 510, staff sickness. Any questions on that? And again, that is a long-standing item which has severe impact from COVID. And before that, it was just a few members of staff who were on long-term staff sick leave and were affecting the statistics. 511, residual household waste per household. Again, that has a COVID dimension because people were working at home. Any questions? And the final issue where there was underperformance, 512 household waste reused, cycled and composted, where there has been a degree of recovery on that item. Any questions? So are you happy that the major areas of failure which were reported to us from the last financial year have been adequately explained to your satisfaction in this report, other than the item which we're taking forward to the housing strategy? And parking a question for Colchester Borough Homes next time they turn up. So we note this, and we're happy that the explanations are acceptable to the panel. Thank you. Now move forward to item 12 on page 47, which is the year-end performance report from the strategic plan action plan, which is the next tier down from the strategic plan itself. And again, Mr. Block is reporting to us.
Thank you, Chair. Similar to the last report, this is a look back over last year's performance. As the Chair said, it's against the action plan for achieving the Council's strategic objectives as detailed by the Council's strategic plan adopted by full Council previously. And this is a look back at the many achievements, and there are many, despite it being a COVID impacted year. These are actually detailed in the strategic plan action plan. Obviously, this year that we're coming into, we're in, is our last year of this strategic plan. So we'll be looking at some form of end of plan report coming forward. But as I say, this is the look back for last year. There's many achievements. It is long. We have noted that, and there will be efforts to shorten this, make it slightly easier to consume. Certainly for the next report we see in the mid-year report, and also the report going through to Cabinet. Again, you're pre-scrutinising this before it goes through to Cabinet in September, so you need to satisfy yourselves that sufficient action's been taken as detailed in the strategic plan action plan to actually progress the Council's strategic objectives. Thank you.
If I could echo what Mr. Block was saying, the personal difficulty I have is the strategic plan itself tends to be too big, too long. It covers just about everything. In that perhaps some parts of the council will be offended if they're not referenced in the strategic plan. And therefore, the strategic action plan covers just about everything that the council does. Which is not a bad thing, but if it's going to be a strategic plan, one should be able to see the dimension of priorities and the relationship of, say, budget increases in the annual budget linked to the priorities within the strategic plan. I don't see that happening, because I think both the strategic plan and the strategic action plan are just too big, too voluminous. They're not sharp enough. But that is a matter, of course, for Cabinet, because it is their documents. So, members, are there any issues on the strategic plan action plan which you want to tease out and believe there are related issues which the panel should be considering, or where we should be forwarding a comment to Cabinet that perhaps things should be done in a different way, or with a different priority, or with different goals? It is a huge subject to cover, and I must admit it escapes me how we simply scrutinise such a massive item of work. Colleagues, any comments? Councillor Smith.
I would make some comments on the housing items, but I'll refer to the housing strategy. I think we'd better deal with that in more detail. But there are a few issues under the housing strategy as to what I think we need to tighten up on and ensure that the delivery that's planned actually happens.
Any other questions? Does the portfolio holder wish to address us on the matter?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the comments made. I agree. It is inevitable that to be representative of the work of the council, we will end up with easily with a complex document. I remember working on this, as others would do, several years ago, going through the scrutiny process, and that scrutiny process leading to this is better than before. But the sheer depth and scale of what the council does lend itself to easily to complexity, and that I absolutely agree argues against clarity. So I think that's part of the conversation that we've got to have again internally as we look forward. And of course, this is a document to be owned before council. So the role and views of scrutiny, in my view, are really important. But the essence, as you've described it, I do get looking at this afresh. There is a lot of good things in here we can be proud of, but I am a great fan of lists with clear end dates and clear deliverables, which one can say done, part done, not done. And that's not a disrespect to the nature of the business of the council. It's just an acknowledgement that there is a challenge for us all to try and make it that succinct where we can. So, it's very helpful to have your first reactions, and I'm sure that officers and cabinet will take that away. Thank you.
Are there any other comments on this issue? I feel there is no recommendation we need to make to Cabinet at this point, but of course we will be looking at the mid-year position, and this comes back to us later on in the year, where perhaps we have greater attention to what has happened during the in-year rather than the last year, and a lot of the COVID stuff will be starting to fall out of the equation, so we will be back to normal performance monitoring rather than exceptional performance monitoring. So might we move on? We now move on to item 13, which is perhaps the most important item on the agenda this evening, which is the reappraisal of Colchester's housing strategy for the years 22 to 27, which we have on page 101 of the order paper. If I just move forward. And Councillor Young will, Matt Sterling, the entire team will be leading us through what is a very substantial piece of work. In fact, one's almost tempted to say it looks like the strategic plan, and it can get too substantial at times. But we are in your hands. Please guide us through it, and then we'll ask you some questions. Thank you.
Very much, Chair, and good evening, councillors. It's a statutory duty for the council to have a housing strategy, and this will cover the 5 years from 2022 to 2027. It's a vision for the future, and it's all about access to safe, affordable housing. It describes what we and partners are going to do to address certain elements of housing. And it doesn't just look at Colchester Borough homes housing, social housing, it also looks at private housing as well, private rented housing, which I think is really important in terms of standards and quality. And it also looks at our neighbourhoods and how housing affects our neighbourhoods in terms of health and well-being. And it talks about reducing carbon emissions as well. I think it's a really good document. It's one of the first things as portfolio holder I got to see, and I think it's a really good read actually. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what councillors on the Scrutiny Committee have to say about the document, and of course all the difficult questions will be answered by Matthew and Karen.
you, Councillor Young. Owen, I don't know if you've got our presentation on screen, but if not, it doesn't matter. It's not terribly visual. So. Thanks. So if you could go to the next slide, Owen, please. I'm just going to talk to the first couple of slides and then get Karen to pick up the rest. Karen's done most of the work on the housing strategy. So, just to put this into context, the reason we're bringing this to you today, the reason we have this strategy is at least in part because we have a statutory duty to have one. It sets out our vision for housing in the area. And I think it's really important, particularly because the local plan was at full council last night, to contextualise the difference between the two. So the way I tend to see it is that the local plan will include the overall figures for housing growth in the borough and will include policies about that growth. This strategy tends to focus much more on our duties as a provider of affordable housing, for example, although it does look at other housing as well. It provides an overarching framework for our policies and plans, our housing policies and plans. And as far as possible, we've tried to link this with other key agendas, not least of which is our inequalities and levelling up agenda. Next slide, please. So the ambition of the strategy is to set out our chief priorities for the coming 5 years. It includes a vision as well as some priorities and objectives. It's worth noting there's a really detailed delivery plan that sits underneath this document. So this is by nature quite a high level document. It is meant to simply encapsulate our work with partners and our understanding of the evidence base and set out priorities, no more. The delivery plan goes into micro detail about individual projects and what we'll do to achieve these priorities. This highlights how our housing work contributes to the wider agendas. It describes how we use limited resources, and crucially, it sets out how we will approach working in partnership, because increasingly most of what gets done in the world of housing in Colchester is not done directly, certainly by Karen's team, but sometimes not even by the council. It's done by registered providers or housing associations, as we used to call them. It's done by private developers, and it's done by the third sector. So I thought it'd be useful just to include, sorry, next slide please, Owen, some scene setting over the next couple of slides. So you'll know the population of the borough is 197,000, so large and growing. We've pulled out a couple of, a really interesting thing there about low income, and we can see that almost 15% of children in the borough live in low income families. And those are the families most likely to be turning to our help or that of registered providers for affordable housing. And obviously that affordable housing is a key determinant of health and well-being. And we see, and you'll be aware of this from other presentations, that there's a big difference within the borough between the life expectancy of the better off and the worse off. And whenever we look at the data, we see that housing is an absolutely crucial part of that well-being. So next slide, Aaron, please. And then the last couple of slides that I was going to talk about was, there's a couple of facts on this slide about population. I think the one I really just want to draw your attention to is the number of households. So 84,000 households. And you can see of an estimated 34,000 people over the age of 65. So, the population demographics are changing over time. So I'm just going to end with a couple of key outcomes that have been achieved and some key facts. So 741, sorry, and this is on the next slide, Owen, 741 new homes were built in Colchester during the year 20 to 21, which was the last year we had data for at this point. 101 of those were affordable. Actually, we've got some slightly more up-to-date data in on that, which makes it look like it was about 117 last year, but broadly similar. We've got just over 3,000 households on the housing register. So that's mean 3,000 people who've registered their interest in securing affordable housing. Obviously, they've all been given a priority, and they've all got a different priority, and that is the broad number for those including people at the lower priority bands. We did 474 affordable lets in the year 2020 to 2021. And I think just worth noting, 46 properties were sold under the Right to Buy scheme. So that's properties leaving the social housing stock. So I'm going to hand over to Karen, who's just going to talk a bit about how the strategy has been developed.
In terms of developing the strategy, we did a lot of collaboration. Sorry, Owen, this is the next slide. So we had an evidence base that we updated, and we held a very successful consultation event with our partners and other teams within the council. We established a project group, and the group met several times to look at the feedback that we had from the workshop, and also the evidence base and other things that we had drawn upon to develop the strategy. We shared the strategy with our officers, partners for their comments, and we also took the strategy to the Colchester Borough Homes Board for their input as well. Next slide, Owen, please. Sorry. We looked at national policy, and we considered it to ensure that the strategy that we were developing aligned with some of the priority housing issues. And obviously, these included initiatives for increasing the housing supply, and obviously home ownership, the reforming of the welfare system, and also the standard and quality of housing in both the social and the private sector, and the new levelling up agenda as well. We identified a vision for the strategy, which is really important, and this is, as you can see, but I will read it to you: Colchester, where all residents have access to a safe and affordable home that promotes health and equality in a sustainable community. So that was the priority that we agreed on with the project group, and also ideas that had come out of the workshop too. Next slide, please, Owen. We've identified 4 key priorities for the strategy. So supply, increase the supply of quality affordable homes. Sustainability and community, so supporting people to maintain their homes and to build sustainable communities. So really important, the areas in which people live. Structure, as I've just mentioned, you know, the standard and the structure of the homes, really important issue. So we will reduce carbon emissions from homes and improve the quality and standards of our homes. And the 4th priority is to do with our homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. This is not included in the delivery plan of this strategy, but we have a separate homelessness and rough sleeping strategy that sits underneath this strategy. So we include it as one of the key priorities. So it's a strategy in its own right. So we feel it, you know, and obviously this is the overarching strategy, the housing strategy, so it sits within it. These priorities that we've identified, they will be achieved, as Matt has already said, through the implementation of our delivery plan, so actions within that delivery plan to achieve the priorities that we've set out. And the delivery plan will be monitored by both the project group, and obviously it will be circulated, and the progress will be reported to the portfolio holder and published on our website. So it's not strategy that we won't be revisiting. It's a working document, and we'll be using it, and we will be reporting progress yearly on it. So I think that's about it.
Thank you. Just make clear what we're discussing this evening. We're discussing the housing strategy. We're not really discussing how we got the plan and the assumptions behind it. And we're not discussing the underlying documents, such as the homeless strategy, all of which are extremely interesting, and I probably want to debate more than I do the actual strategy itself. So we really need to focus on what the strategy is saying and whether we think it is fit for purpose. Looking through this report, I suddenly become alive when I get to the sections on page 116 and in the glossy document later on, when we get onto the vision and the 4 key priorities, because to me, that is what the new strategy is all about, and the rest of it is how we got there and who helped us on the way and so on. So clearly we all have our view on how we scrutinize this, but my great delight is the simple presentation of the 4 key priorities and why those are the 4 key priorities and why they taken together form the nucleus of a solid, reliable strategy which will guide us in the provision of housing over the next 5 years. And I'm sure we can discuss those at length. We also need to just check that they are answering the really important questions, because we all have our own set of really important questions. To me, the sort of questions I want answered by the strategy, or able to answer myself when I've read the new strategy, are how do we get maximum housing bang for housing bucks out of the system? Is our money better spent by giving it to housing associations, or should we be acquiring housing associations? The strategies along those lines. Issues such as how do we deliver housing? Are we looking for the minimum number of houses per year which are at the highest standard? Or should we be looking for the maximum number of social houses each year at the lower of the standards? I'm not suggesting we consider junk standards or Rackman's type standards, but there is a range. Should we be looking at housing which is at the top end of the market, but that may restrict us to housing a smaller number of people? The housing strategy also needs to explain clearly what we're going to do about the 3,000 people who are on the waiting list. I mean, is the waiting list 3,000? Is it going to go down if we take action, or is it always going to be topped up by new people coming along? So we're never going to achieve a reduction. Is the housing strategy going to make a real inroad into the 3,000 people on the housing list, and will these 4 key priorities actually do that? And do we need to think of anything else in terms of strategic housing priorities to get us down from a waiting list of 3,000 to a waiting list of, never be 0, but bouncing along on the sort of 0 to 100 rather than 3,000 to 3,100 houses? Are there any significant changes which we believe should be driven by the housing strategy? For instance, going to higher density flats rather than the traditional housing stock that we have been in very small numbers over the last year, good as it is, excellent houses that they are. With this strategy, are we going to be able to solve the problem? So I certainly like key priorities, wonderful. I think they're the essence of the new strategy. But then there are a series of questions which, as I was outlining, which are the tests. Is this strategy really going to work? Or will it survive but perhaps not deliver what we would like to see it being delivered? So that was my initial take, but clearly, colleagues, you will all have your own views. Who wishes to start? Councillor Scordis.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you've summed up quite well there. I've just got a question on two aspects, mainly around the cost of living. One thing that I've been seeing for the last few years is the amount of evictions with landlords selling up, partly due to the pandemic and the housing market and worry in economic environment, but also with the government scheme of landlords have to update their current homes to certain energy efficiency, and some people can't afford it. What are projections on the number of people that may be joining that waiting list and what we can do for them? And the second one is, are we expecting a big hit on hitting housing targets, as we know developers and construction workers are struggling to get the materials they need due to a number of factors ranging from Brexit to the war in Ukraine and so forth?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yes, I share Councillor Scordis's concerns on those issues. I'm also concerned, though, about the number of people who are going to need affordable housing increasing substantially over the period. You were putting up slides there saying the average price of housing in Colchester, £350,000. Median income, somewhere in the region of £27,500. That's a multiple of 12 times. It's becoming increasingly difficult, not just for people on low incomes, but people on medium incomes to get on the housing ladder in Colchester. And if they're not buying properties, then they're going to put pressure on the rental market, and that's going to cause even more problems. So are we looking enough at whether the figures that we're looking at are going to be high enough? And the second point ties in with what we're looking at on planning gain earlier on this evening. I noticed we're meant to be getting 20% of all developments for social housing. Well, we had 700 houses last year, 20% of that's 140, and we got way less than that. We've now increased it to 30%. How can we be assured that we are going to be getting that 30%? Because that 30% figure is going to be crucial to meeting this housing strategy.
Okay, over to you, Matt.
I'm going to take a stab at answering some of those, and then I'm going to defer to the person that knows more about housing than me. But I think if we start with evictions, it's really hard to project evictions. What we certainly do is, when people present as homeless to us, actually sometimes quite early in the process, so before they're literally homeless, but when their landlord has started the eviction process, we will give factual advice about the process and their rights to notice and the like, and we'll prioritise them. And some of them will have quite a high priority and will get a high band on the housing register. It's very hard to know how many people will experience that in the coming year, but in a tight housing market, you could expect more rather than less, would be my assumption. And which links to the affordability issue, because we know, the more unaffordable homes become, the more people rely on affordable homes. We do now, when we secure housing gain, affordable homes through housing gain, we do get an array of products. So we'll get the classic affordable rented homes that are done through registered providers, but we will also get some homes on various right to buy or help to buy schemes rather. So we try and achieve a balance. In terms of the planning, achieving the 30%, as you say, it is 30% now. I think the figures for last year are quite distorted by various lockdowns and pressures on the construction industry. What I can see is how many affordable homes we asked for at the point where planning permission is given, and we're routinely asking for 30% on each development and securing that. So I'd be very optimistic that we'd see an increase in the overall delivery of affordable homes in this year. I suspect there was all sorts of issues about lags last year connected to the various elements of the pandemic. But we routinely, our starting point on a planning application is always, an eligible planning application is always to seek 30% affordable housing. And I should say that is only one route we use to increase the supply of affordable housing. So I always think of it as 4 main routes at the moment. We seek 30% through planning gain. We have the power to build homes of our own, and we've been working with Amphora about building homes. We've actually got a really successful process of acquiring homes, buying homes on the open market to boost the social housing stock. And ironically, most of the homes we buy tend to be ex-council houses that were sold through the right to buy, and we often use right to buy receipts to buy them back, but it does have the desired effect. And then the fourth approach is we work with charities and other developers like Arms House charities to see if we can help them develop even more social housing. So the 30% we asked for by planning gain is definitely volume. But for example, last year we bought 100 homes on the open market to boost their affordable stock. So, we try and be as imaginative as we can to achieve those goals.
I think Matt's covered it all. Actually, I don't think I have anything more to add on that.
Good. We have to remember that buying homes makes us feel good, but it doesn't actually increase the total number of houses in the borough. So key priority 1, we will increase the supply of quality affordable homes. Given your question, Councillor Smith, do you feel that there are any issues which you're teasing out with your questions which are not covered by the existing text of priority 1? In other words, how we are going to increase the supply of quality affordable homes so that there's no one on the waiting list, which is what I would have written, but I accept that you've missed off so there's no one on the waiting list. Are there any amendments that you would wish to see, as opposed to the delivery of how it's going to be done, whether it's capable of being done? But is there anything deficient in the strategy around the point that you were just making, questioning, where you believe there should be a change to the vision and key priorities?
I would like to have a little more comfort that I'm hearing the words "we seek to achieve 30% social housing," and yet clearly the figures are indicating we're not getting 30% or 20%. Look at the figures, and I obviously don't know how many were major applications. We're struggling to get even 10%, and maybe we need to look at why we are not achieving the 30% that we're seeking on all developments, if that's the first thing that we ask for. Because I would like to understand more. If we're meant to be building 900 homes a year, then 30% of that means we should be getting 300 affordable homes a year coming through.
Again, can I put your question in the context of the words that we have before us, and it's the words that matter. And the words say the allocation for affordable housing is 30% on all proposals considered in major developments, etc. So the strategy, which is what we're looking at, as opposed to whether the portfolio holder is actually doing it, this strategy which we're looking at this evening is crystal clear to me. The local plan says affordable housing is 30% on all major developments. And that is the strategy, and that is what we are scrutinising. And I believe that the words set out in that key priority adequately, more than adequately, cover in a very unambiguous manner. Now we can go into questions of will it be delivered? Do we have the clout to ensure that it's being delivered? But those are other issues. The strategy is crystal clear.
I think the strategy is fine, but I think there's a marker I'd like to put down that I am looking at 30%, and I suspect other members of the scrutiny panel will be expecting to see 30% on all major developments. And perhaps the figures could be presented with how much your figures were from major developments, so we could just very quickly see the 30% there going forward.
So is this an unachievable target that we're putting into a key priority? I guess that's what we want to know for scrutinising your strategy. Are you putting something in here which you know cannot be delivered? Or are you absolutely confident that this element of the strategy will be delivered, the council will deliver it?
Yeah, I mean, the priority here is to increase the supply of affordable housing, and I'm very confident we'll do that. One of the tools that we have at our disposal is the 30% on larger developments. As I say, I'm actually very confident that we're asking for that every time. The reason I don't think it will ever be that we will achieve that the affordable housing delivery will be 30% of total new homes delivered will be because, of course, housing built on very small sites won't qualify. And we're not allowed to make developments unviable. So sometimes we don't get 30% because some nature of the site, perhaps the site needs remediation, whatever it be, means that we can't get 30%. But 30% is always our going in position, and we push hard and require very convincing evidence to lead us to believe that we should settle for anything less. So and I also feel very confident that in the coming year you'll see a better delivery of affordable housing. And that isn't just speculation. We do maintain a pipeline of the homes that RPs, registered providers, are expecting to complete this year, and we're seeing a good number coming through the pipeline. And I've no doubt at all when you have the housing portfolio holder in front of you for scrutiny later in the year, you'll want to know some of that performance, and we'll make sure she has all of the figures. But as I've said, the 30% on larger developments is only one tool we use. We've got a target to acquire properties this year. I take your point that it doesn't increase the overall stock, but it absolutely increases the stock of affordable housing, and the other methods we've talked about. And actually, I think that the item at full council last night about the local plan is the crucial thing to increase the overall supply of housing per se, because you need a local plan in place to drive that kind of housing growth. So I think I'll stop there. Did you want to add something?
Councillor Lilly.
Yeah, on that the viability one, which is the get out clause for every wonderful developer, and they always try to do that. So we insist on 30%. They come back with a viability report to say, oh no, we can't afford to build any of those houses because we're not making any profit whatsoever. Mainly because they've set up the schemes that major companies have, local companies which have their own finance. So we've been here before. Or they'll say, we'll build them elsewhere. That's what they could say. They could say that it has been done in the past. So if you've got an area, say Row Hedge, we've got a lot of people waiting for houses there, but they'll build an estate, but they'll put the social housing elsewhere. So there's nowhere for people in the village to buy a house because they can't afford it. So are we just then creating areas of affordable housing estates only in other areas? How can we insist that they build it if they can build them elsewhere or pay for them? Why can't they build them on that? Because is there any way we could challenge the viability scheme? I think I know the answer. there's going to be a government one.
Yeah, I think we have to look at individual sites. So actually, you know, we'd have to look at it case by case. But yes, we absolutely, you know, try to do our best on that score. And you're right. Sometimes that doesn't, you know, pan out. But you know, having an overarching thing on it would be quite difficult. I think we'd have to look at it on site by site.
And just, sorry, could I just add to that one that the planning team will absolutely require an open book approach. So, you know, if a developer is telling us that there's something about the site that doesn't allow for 30%, that isn't just taken as read. We'll want to see the figures. We'll want that justified. There are people in planning who are forensic about this. So we don't always get 30%, but I'm confident that we always feel like we got the most that was acceptable and viable.
Councillor Lilly, you have another point, yeah?
Yeah, and on the other issue, and it's starting to come up now, is that can we put in as a policy that those affordable houses are offered to local people first, rather than put on the general home choice? Because that way you then will make sure that people who have relatives in the area actually stay here they've grown up in. I think it's really good, especially in rural areas. Otherwise, you're moving around all over the place. But it'd be nice if we could create families could stay together, and that's what makes well, it makes a village. That doesn't. I heard that before somewhere, and it's starting to creep into planning applications now as well. Parish councils are asking, and we've started to do that and insist on it. So, how can we make that a proper policy?
The laws, was yours on the same area?
On a similar vein, on the viability, I mean, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm very grateful for an easily digestible answer. But surely, if we have a policy that says 30% affordability, if a developer comes forward and says that it's not viable, then they've paid too much money for the land, have they not? Isn't it as simple as that?
Yep.
And so, you know, we need to stick to our guns, don't we?
Yeah, life is not simple. And I remember when we were looking at the neighbourhood plan in the village where I live, we had a questionnaire. All the parents and grandparents wanted more houses for their children to live in the village. We then asked the children where they wanted to live, and they all said at least 5 miles from our parents. So, you know, one has to be careful with some of these broad assumptions which are not backed up by fact. Was there any other questions on this line?
Chair,
Councillor Sordis.
I was just going to come back to the point Councillor Lilly made, if I may, and he was talking about you know, making it a priority for local areas to have access to those properties. And I think for schemes where we're developing Colchester Borough homes, we're certainly looking to make sure that that is to local families. And by doing so, you actually, if we're building flats as we are on some of the garage sites, by building those for that locality's residents to move into, it actually will free up bigger homes that we can actually then help more families into. So there is a good strategy, I think, in place to do that. I'll let others comment on a more general policy basis, but we're certainly doing that in schemes that we're developing ourselves.
Can I ask whether that is anywhere in the strategy document? Speed reading it now. Is the keeping together of families under the housing policy sufficiently important for it to be one of our key priorities?
We actually adopt quite a mixed approach to this, because there are schemes where we absolutely prioritise what we would call local letting. But there are lots of other schemes where actually we award housing on the basis of need. So the housing register has been described a couple of times this evening as a housing waiting list. It's really important to think of it not as that. So it's a housing register where any one of us could choose to join the register. There's no bars to joining. Your housing need will be assessed and you'll be given a priority banding. And the higher your priority banding, the quicker you would reasonably expect to secure housing. But all people on the register are allowed to bid for housing each week when they become available, and those are then prioritised on need. And that's a really important principle, because if you're literally homeless, you should be given a high priority compared to someone who is adequately housed but happens to be near something that's built new. So there are times when we have a local letting policy and we do prioritise people in the immediate area. That's for a variety of different reasons, sometimes because problems have arisen. But in general, we work with several other councils in the region to have a joint approach, and people can bid for housing anywhere in that region. And actually, we're really proud that on the whole, the approach is do it on the basis of need. So house the people that are in the greatest need first, you know, as a principle.
Councillor Lilly, an additional point?
Yeah, just with my chair of planning hat on. This year we've had a trial application come in from Langenau where they have asked for the local letting to be put in. So the planning team has agreed to that, to see how it's taken up by residents that'll come in there. But they wanted it, but of course, as soon as they've done that, we've now latched onto it. We want it for everywhere, with an O and row H as well. But there is there is a trial application going on over at Langenau to see how we get on with that.
Can I ask the panel's view on the point? Clearly it's dear to several members' hearts. Do we believe the housing strategy should contain a policy on sort of family affiliation for housing allocations? We've heard Matt explain that there are a number of criteria of which family affiliation is but one of them, and sometimes the other criteria will take precedence over family affiliations. Is this an area where we as a panel wish to send a comment that it is not adequately dealt with in the proposals for the new strategy? Vice Chairman.
Thank you. I'm still a little bit confused, because either we have a policy or we don't have a policy. So either it's in the strategy or it's not in the strategy. If it's not in the strategy, then yes, I think we need to be clearer in the direction that we're going here. So I believe that yes, we should add as a recommendation that we need some clarification on where we stand, because I understand what you're saying. We almost take it on a, you know, one by one basis, but when we're producing a strategy of this complexity, of this length, I think it should be included in it. The other point that I wanted to make on the section 106 and affordable housing, the affordable housing, of course, is only one small part of the contributions that we're looking for. And what I've seen and heard so many times, at one stage I was cabinet member at county, including planning, and we would have regular meetings with housing portfolio holders from the whole of the county. And the one thing that we heard often, many times, was that the Essex County Council contribution was actually neglected. You know, it was, you can't have everything. You can't get everything from the developer. And so perhaps sometimes, and I'm not saying we did it here, but I heard the rumour that Colchester will say, let's say, well, okay, Mr. Developer, we'll keep our affordable housing, our 30%, and we'll get our contributions for our litter bins and our public open space. But don't worry quite so much about the health contribution or the education contribution, because we're actually just dealing with Colchester here. To this day, I still don't really know if that ever really happened, or it was just a rumour. But I do think we have to be aware that there are so many pulls on the investor, and if we stick religiously to the 30%, which we certainly should, then we might then lose the education contribution or the open space contribution. So I think we have to look at so many different things just apart from that 30%.
okay.
And the one, yeah, I think you're right. And the other thing that that does come up, and we all know over the last few years, and they still make comments now, every time we pass an application, oh, why are we doing this? This is just for the people in London, every time. All the time, we know the truth of it all. But London boroughs are now starting to buy up houses outside of London because of the rental situation. And we know they've purchased houses down in Harwich and Clacton because they're cheaper down there, and they're moving people down there. We don't want that. And to safeguard housing for Colchester and to stop all these rumours, the council has a responsibility to look after its own residents. It might seem like we're all a bunch of NIMBYs who want to live there, but communities grow up together because you know, you settle down in an area and your other relatives move in nearby and you create a community together, and it's what makes it. But moving people around, find a house somewhere else as cheap as possible is not a way of helping communities build in. And I'd like to see that in there rather than elsewhere. So.
Okay, we've identified the issue as of family affiliation, which we'll be coming back to when we look at our recommendations. Smith.
Sorry, I understood that under the home choice point scoring system, that is one of the factors that you do get points for having affiliate. So it is included. It may be the weighting is not sufficient, but that probably is a level of detail which is above what we should be going into here. But could you just confirm that is one of the factors that's in there?
Yeah, Colchester has signed up to the Gateway to Home Choice allocations policy, and the things you're talking about in respect to that are in that policy. It's dealt with within the policy. Sorry, lose my voice. Dealt with within the allocations policy, and we're signed up to that with 7 other local authorities. So, yeah.
So just to be clear, say Mike and I both had equal points from everything else, but there was an application coming up for a property in Rowhedge. He would get more points than I would for that one because sadly I can't claim any affiliation with Rowhedge. And so therefore he would be...
If there was a local letting policy there for living in Rowhedge, yes.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to just sort of just give an example, and you know, because it's quite complicated, and the allocations policy covers a lot of those things. And just recently there's some changes that just very slight changes, but that has been circulated, and so yes.
Right. If we look at the second key priority, which is sustainability in the community, we will support people to maintain their homes and build sustainable communities. Are there any discussions on this second major plank of the new policy?
I was on the housing list for a few years, and I haven't actually been on the bidding because I just give up. A flag come up on the page, and I applied for it. I had all the links, and didn't get it. Somebody, I got offered.
Councillor Lilly, we're going to move on from.
I know, but
it's very detailed. Personal reminiscences can occur after the meeting is closed. If it's to do with the housing strategy, other than we've already agreed that we're going to come back and have a recommendation on family affiliation, which I think is the issue you're talking about. But it's a long policy, and we need to ensure that we have looked at all the key issues rather than just. We spent a lot of time on the 30% affordable and family affiliations, and there are other major issues where we need to assure ourselves that the policy that's being presented to us is correct, robust, and what we want to support.
Your speech just now, I would have finished mine by now.
Okay.
Just to say that I got a family from Dis, or one single man younger than me moved in there, and I got offered a place up in Norfolk as well.
Good-o. That's what I say. Good-o. Yeah. Key priority 2, sustainability and community. We will support people to maintain their homes and build sustainable communities. And then there is a set of dialogue. Do anyone have questions on the robustness of this particular key priority in the strategy? Councillor Scordis.
Thank you, Chairman. Although we talk about sustainability, there seems to be a kind of lack of mention around environmental aspects, such as allotments could be an option here, looking at extra sites and so forth coming forward, and how communities can work together to do that. Mention of car club, another way people can be sustainable. So I think there is a bit more work that could be done here, unless I've missed that on here. The Greensted idea is obviously a really good idea for those deprived areas. But if we're being honest, when we're building a lot of these new estates, there's a lot of people who aren't deprived because they're buying private homes. So for me, there's a chance there to look at your community gardens, community allotments, so forth, moving forward to be more sustainable in our strategy.
So is Councillor Scordis's point covered adequately under key priority 2 in your view, Matt?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. When the development, the delivery plan is finished, I think you'll see a raft of work in there about two types of work really. Work to help individual households continue to be able to maintain their home. So that will be help with the cost of living crisis, help being able to afford their rent, for example. But then more what I would call community development interventions to help encourage people to build proper communities. And that could absolutely include some of the examples Councillor Scordis has mentioned.
Is that acceptable? Is that okay? Thank you. Any other points on priority 2? Then if we forward to priority 3, we will reduce carbon emissions from homes and improve the standards of homes. Are there any comments on the dialogue underwriting this particular key priority in the strategy? I think it's always been our policy that we provide up to the standards that government sets. And then key priority 4, which actually references down to the policies on homelessness, rough sleeping, and some of the more difficult to deal with situations, but which need to be in a strategic context, a definite view that we will consider those items. Any views? Any comments on the strategy? Can I put it back to Councillor Young? I mean, you've heard our discussions. Are we're minded, I think, to reinforce the 30%, despite the misgivings that there were around the table in terms of a strategic approach, and there's been considerable concern about family affiliations. I mean, do you have a view or anything you can add before we formalise our opinions?
I'm not sure what I can helpfully add. I think Matt has identified that there's a range of measures that we would deploy to actually get our supply of social housing, and some of that will be that 30% from developers. And, you know, I leave it to you to come up with some kind of recommendation that will be considered by Cabinet tomorrow. In terms of the family affiliation, I think that there is a bit of confusion, I guess, a bit of concern from my perspective about how the panel are approaching this and actually our commitments under Gateway to Home Choice, because we're a partner in that process, and so we have signed up to be a partner and adopted the plan that they have, the policy they have got. There was a slight, as Karen says, there's been a recent few changes to the allocations policy, and I don't know whether that would go to scrutiny. I'd kind of turn to it's been signed off, the allocations policy, so it was circulated to members. You're at liberty to make what recommendation you want, Mr. Chairman, but we have just amended the allocations policy, and as I said, we work with others under Gateway to Home Choice in terms of you know, what affords points to get an allocation, but as Matt has identified, where there's a requirement, there is a sensitive approach taken to particular circumstances that vary how we move forward in terms of those allocations. And I gave you an example of where we might, and I know it's happened in Greenston myself, and I know it's going to happen in the future in Greenston. So what we do need to do is make best use of our housing stock, and therefore we need to encourage people that are in 3-bedroomed houses into smaller accommodation if that's suitable for their needs, to free up accommodation for families, which are obviously where we've got desperate need for additional housing. Mike has identified his own particular circumstance in terms of an allocation in Rowhedge, but we don't know the full picture, and every case has to be sort of considered on its merits. We don't know what happened with the man from Diss. He may have had absolutely good reasons why he needed that flat in Rowhedge.
Thank you, sage words. I sense that it is the panel's view that, with a couple of exceptions, we are happy with the robustness of the preparation work for the new housing strategy for the next 5 years. We've been picking around the edges, but very little has come out which would suggest that the strategy is significantly deficient in any area, or failing to meet its likely objectives. So, I mean, is that a general starter position that that having looked at it in detail, we are reasonably happy with the strategy? Mm-hmm. The second point, we had a long discussion about 30%, and I personally would be loathed to take out of this strategy the 30% target, because I think that is one of the key tools we have to ensure that there's a sensible supply of affordable housing in the borough. I hear members' concerns about whether it can be delivered and viability and all the other issues, but what we're considering this evening is a strategy. And the strategy of 30%, I believe, is right. And I think, I believe it's so right, we should actually be saying that it's absolutely right. And it is one of the key components which we believe must be there in the strategy. And how it's done, who delivers it, whether they succeed or fail is another matter. But from a strategic point of view, that is the right thing to do. So is it your agreement that we reinforce our view that despite the failure to achieve this in the past, it is the right strategy for Colchester? So we can agree to that. Then we come to the knotty issue of the family affiliation. This is a new strategy for the next 5 years, and it may well be that the gateway allocations have been scrutinised in the past and have been found to be in good order. So the question we now have to decide is whether we believe that the family affiliation, as dealt with under the existing gateway questionnaire points allocated, is adequate. Although we seriously believe that at a strategic level, the new strategy should be giving greater impetus to family affiliations in the overall scheme of providing affordable housing in the borough. So that's the question I think we need to decide now. Are we happy to leave it to the existing gateway, or do we feel so strongly that the family affiliation is an important issue which is not overtly brought out in the new strategy? So do we want to leave it to gateway, or do we want to ask that the strategy be reinforced on family affiliation? And we have views. Councillor Lilly.
I think as the planning team have put something in place with this this year, perhaps we wait and get a report back on that, see how that went. If any local people actually apply for the housing to come in, that'll be the issue. If it's successful there, then perhaps we could come back to it later on.
So, sensing that we don't want to report, we don't want to make a recommendation on family affiliation in the context of the housing strategy for 2022 to 27, but we'd like a report at a future date, just how well the existing gateway strategy is operating in regard to the context of keeping families together when they so wish, or there are other local reasons why people wish to be in close proximity. So we're decoupling. Is that agreed? We will decouple those issues. Councillor Smith.
Yes, I think also I'd like to hear about the experiment they're doing at Langenhoe and see whether that is something we would like to incorporate into a future revision. Because at the moment it's an experiment, it may or may not work. But if it does work, it might be something that we would want to look at incorporating the strategy.
Are there any other proposals to comment on the strategy, or have we covered everything? Mr. Brook, you've got a.
I think Owen probably.
I know
And there's general agreement, wasn't there?
You can write a lightning minute for cabinet tomorrow, and we just trust our officers to capture our words and put them into legalese. So we agreed on the approach. Oh, can I thank you for that? That was clearly going to be a difficult. We should have broken between 7:30 and 8, and it's now 8. So I'm proposing a 10-minute adjournment of the committee for those who need a coffee, smoke, or whatever. So back in 10 minutes, please. And we're picking up on item 14, the annual scrutiny report on page 165. Owen Howell will lead us through it, although it's a factual account.
Yes, I don't have anything to add to the report, and I'll take the report and its appendix as read, so I'm happy to take any questions on it. I think the only thing that I will say is just a reminder, as what I pointed out last year, is that we ended up in a situation where the annual report from Scrutiny Panel, as we see here, comes to the Scrutiny Panel for agreement right after we've had the election period and the potential change of Scrutiny Panel. So for the next one, that next one will actually come to this Scrutiny Panel at the end of this municipal year for agreement. So you'll get to agree on what your own actions have been rather than agreeing what the last panel's actions have been. So happy to take questions.
And the few of us who were on the panel last year, I'm sure will agree that it's an accurate report. It accurately represents what we did, what we said, and what we decided. But the idea of having it at the end of the year is good. Any questions, colleagues, on this report? Any objections to its content? So we agree the report and forward it. We then move to item 15 on page 181. Which is a report in regard to potential new work items on the Haven Road flooding. We're not having the report presented formally. We're supposed to have read it. Oh, we have your say. Sorry. Have your say on Haven Road flooding. The floor is yours, Mr.
Haven Road flooding. On the 22nd of March, I attended a cabinet meeting and asked then the leader about the flooding and what intervention he and or the chief executive officer had made with the agencies concerned. Now I got the usual answer, sort of working with agencies response, and I left with the thought, well, how much longer do they need, for goodness sake? I know it's a complex matter. I know it isn't Colchester Borough Council's fault, but it is a matter of considerable public interest, and it's damned inconvenient. Your planners have described Haven Road, in the local plan as part of the informal circular route, so it must be important. One doesn't expect to check the tide tables and times before setting out to or the Ipswich Road. I remarked about the dearth of information, and Councillor Ellis made the suggestion that updates could be posted on the council website. Well, okay, fair enough. Don't know whether that happened, but anyway, frankly, who really reads that? And it shouldn't be left to ward councillors to do all the communication. Now, you mind Colchester Council may not be the problem solver, but the council should take on the role of residents' champion, an information provider, the official version. Now, this report, the one you've got in front of you, is understandably techie, but not understandable to the layperson. Where are the gullies, the holding tanks, the flaps that do or don't work pump into the river? Where does the water bubble up from? How will the pumps work? Is a pump needed? If it is, who's going to pay for it? Get on with it. Draw us a map. Give us a visual perspective.
even look, give it to the sixth form, they can sort it out if they gather the information. Circulate it to the business community in the area, put it on local Old Heath Guys Facebook page. That can be done for next to nothing. As often is the case, boffins talk to each other, but not to those affected. If the council put as much effort as they do into this as they do tell us about what's going on in the park, you may get some credit for the work going on down there. And please don't say, well, it's not our job to organise that, or Will Quince is covering that. It's junior minister. So the paper you've got in front of you, is it for information only, or is it for scrutiny? In my opinion, it needs to be gripped by a member of the cabinet, portfolio holder, and they should take the lead and pull the parties together and give them a kick up the backside, to put it bluntly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The item was on the agenda because it was brought forward by the ward councillors who had concerns about the problem. The scrutiny panel was concerned as to whether any value add would occur by the scrutiny panel considering it, given that we're not a major player, in fact, not a player at all. Others were already bringing together those parties which do have responsibility and budget to achieve or effect a solution. And this is a matter which is neither in the current council budget nor in its structure plan, so strategic plan rather. So there was a question of whether it is a matter with which the council should concern itself, and whether scrutiny panel should be taking a view and making a recommendation on whether the problem is being handled as well as it is at the moment, or whether we see a defect in the way that it's being handled, a defect which could be remedied by suggesting residents' championship action on the part of the council. Having asked those questions, this is the report which has come back to us. It certainly does not suggest that the matters are being delayed because there is insufficient CBC budget or any strategic guidelines which would have expedited a solution here. But nevertheless, the ward councillors were concerned. So if we can go to ward councillors for all those councillors who represent the areas. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. And just for clarity, myself and Councillor Scalders are on the task group, and Darius has appeared here and there over the year, I think, as well. So he knows a bit about it. So it was set up, and it was great. It was set up right from the start, and the agencies that we wanted there were there. And it's a massive, complicated issue. Anglian Water, Environmental Agency, Essex County Council, the Highways Department, CBC, the Harbour Master, the Fire Authority were all involved, the Sewage Works, Anglian Water there. But after a year, and after discussing and finding out where the problems lie, who's responsible, the problem, they got complicated when they did a test of the river, of the water in Haven Road, found out it was fresh water that was flooding in the area, which further complicated the issue that it wasn't just the river that was involved. And then we found out it was to do with Distillery Lane, and then it was also backed up to Bourne Pond, and issues like that. So we were getting fed up, everyone was getting fed up, I think. All we wanted was someone to put their hands up first to say, we will finance this money if we get contributions from everybody else. So you've got the drainage, so it should be the highways, and it should be Anglian Water. In my opinion, those two people should be responsible for it. because it's the drainage and the water supply from the river. The tanks, the silo tanks that the extra water goes into are in the road. One's outside Travis Perkins facility, and there's another one further up the road towards Whitehill Road, which floods. And then we found out that the water doesn't come down from Distillery Lane straight down the lane from the pond. It goes in pipes in a haphazard way because of land ownage issues over the years. And everything that's been caused has been done a long time ago. And the way it's been built up around those areas has complicated things, but we are where we are. So what we want is someone, actually, it would be fair if everybody involved would put some money in, share it all between themselves, and sort it out between themselves, rather than just blame one or two people involved in that. So we're still going on. We are waiting for a feasibility study into what with the issue of the temporary pump. The pump could work, what sort of pump we need, can it cope with all the flooding, who's going to be responsible for installer in an area, who's going to be responsible for operating the pump as such. So it's not as easy as I wanted it to be. Of course, I just put the pump in and someone's going to come out and just pump it out. But the fire authority have said that because they deal with flooding issues elsewhere, or they used to, they'd be quite happy to look into it and to probably be on a call out, come out and deal with the flooding of the area to resolve it. But we are still waiting for that feasibility study and how much it's going to cost and will it cope with that. So we can start with just that temporary flooding, but the issues of all the other stuff are still out there. The drains all need doing. But I think that somebody probably, and I don't want to put pressure on Will because he's got his own problems at the moment. He is the chair of the task group. And perhaps he should come along and he'd be a better person to explain really are the greater issues. And because he's worked the Mangling Water and he's had meetings with all those people because we just members of the task group. But it would be better for someone like Will to come along to talk to us, to give us his opinion, and to where we go. It's going to cost millions, basically, and that's why the temporary pump is probably the best issue at the moment. It's a temporary resolve to the businesses down there while we sort out the big major problems. Dennis, thank you.
Councillor Laws.
Happy for Councillor Scordis's ward member to have a few words before I go. That's okay.
Sorry, I didn't see Councillor Scordis signalling. He was still eating his baguette.
All right, thank you very much. I mean, to follow on from what Mike has said, I mean, one of the slight criticisms of the Hive Task Force is there isn't much scrutiny, and we've been for calling it a talking shop before, but at times it does feel like that, and it feels like we might be able to give it some direction that pushes it in the right way. Mike talks about funding as well, and what we have talked about is having a funding pot specifically for the Hive flooding that, for example, 106 money could go to. So we have the peculiar problem where 106 money for developments in the Hive is going to walking and cycling, which is fine, but it needs to be swimming first because you have to get through the flooding. So either swimming lessons or a pot to the flooding needs to come first, because even Essex Highways have said we can't put this crossing on Haven Road now because of the flooding. It's highways, they finally realised. So that's kind of the perspective we're looking at it, Chairman.
Councillor Laws.
I think that was very well said by Councillor Scordis. I feel particularly passionate about this item and the river in general, and I'm grateful to Mr. Chilvers for coming here and having his say. From what I can understand, the thrust of the Hive Task Force was because the MP felt that there were people who had the tools their armory if they got together who could pull this off, but it wasn't quite happening. So he was facilitating those conversations, which I know the ward councillors and others have diligently been involved in. And I understand that the Hive Task Force wasn't just about the flooding, it was actually supposed to be and could still be about much more. I know the ward councillors are in particular working on looking at the blue asset, or rather the brown asset that is the river, but it should be a blue asset, and one that's for many years in Colchester not been seized upon as an opportunity. And I know that they are working with their residents to try and come up with what could be done down there. For what it's worth, my personal view is that the borough is culpable in part because, of course, it was a port, wasn't it? And we own land in and around. We are the planning authority, so we do determine what goes on there and have the ability to pull in Section 106 and other such. So for what it's worth, I feel that the borough should be taking a lead where it can in this. I disagree with respectfully with Councillor Lilly. I don't think Will Quince needs to come here. I think he did a good thing in bringing people together and trying to perhaps de-stick some of the politics, which we've all been guilty of in the past, about talking about, you know, what happens in Chelmsford, what happens here, and what happens in other agencies. Now isn't the time for that. Colchester residents really do need to see action on that area. And for what it's worth, also, you know, we should know, shouldn't we, that it was the borough council that sold off the dredger, because at one point the river was dredged. And I know that isn't covered in the report, and I know that some people have strong views on that, but we should understand what's going on there. There's a slight reference to silting up and how that impacts the movement of waters, but the overall river is not being dredged, is it? And does that mean something? I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, but I think the borough has a responsibility, and I would certainly, Chair, support any move tonight to make that a formality that this administration takes strong leadership on.
Well, colleagues, within our charter, we can review or scrutinise decisions made or taken in connection with the discharge functions which are not the responsibility of the Cabinet, and I think this is one of them. Having read this report, it would appear that there was a confusion at best. Will Quince, the MP, stepped in to try and bring people together and has made a success of doing that. But with the best will in the world, he doesn't run a project management office that is capable of bringing all the people together, ensuring that they're working in harmony, they're doing things in a sensible manner, in a cost-effective way, and his office doesn't have the capability to scrutinise what's going on and ensure that if there is a project plan, it runs to target, time, to cost. The point was made by Councillor Laws that we are still a landowner in that area, so we do have an interest. So the choices I think we have before us this evening are to say no, it's really nothing to do with us. There are a group of people who are sort of getting on with the job, and they might succeed in the end if they have a bit of end of year budget which they could spend on a pump and so on. Or we could say this is a matter which requires proper project management, super project management, because of the people involved and the sort of disparate teams and disparate responsibilities. So we need a project manager and we need a process of scrutiny to ensure that there are regular reports, so that the residents' champion, that is us or someone else, knows that the project is proceeding in a way that is in the interest of the residents and the users there. Now, we could be bold and say the Borough Council has those project management skills, although it doesn't have many of the responsibilities in this area. So we could take a bold decision and recommend to Cabinet that they become the residents' champion and put in the project management skills, which we have as a council in abundance, and take an overview of this project. Now, there is no budget at the moment for doing this, It's not in our strategic plan to do it, so it would be entirely in the gift of Cabinet whether they see this as an issue where they can make a positive achievement in the interests of the residents. Having heard the discussions this evening, I think it's worth making a recommendation to Cabinet that they should consider whether they can enhance the solution by providing proper project management skills and scrutiny to this particular area. So we have a choice whether we leave things, we recommend that things stay as they are, or we recommend to Cabinet that some of the useful skills of the Borough Council are brought into action to expedite the work that has already been done. So, which would you prefer, Councillor Lilly?
Yeah, I agree with that. I believe that the work that needs to do is going to take years to resolve, and I'd be happy for the recommendation to include that the Cabinet does look into the temporary pump issue, that they help fund, well, in fact, everyone should fund it as a contribution, but CBC should take the horns and do some funding involved in that, and use 106 money and ask the other departments to chip in as well. That'd be the fairest thing as a temporary measure, but the temporary measure could actually turn into the permanent measure. As for the region, experts have told us that it makes no difference whatsoever because it is an easy solution to do. 10 years ago on the parish council, we looked at hiring the dredger clear at Man Road area because it was starting to build up there. And there is a dredger, there's only one in Essex down the south end. And 10 years ago, it was told it would be £250,000 just to do a small stretch of the river near the Anchor pub just down there. And that was a price far higher of the reach of the parish council. God knows what the price will be now to do the whole of that river. But I think the temporary pump measure, the recommendation, I support that.
Yeah, I think the problem going to Cabinet and saying, look, you provide a wad of funding to speed things up, they will probably say, well, you know, they've got other things that they need to do with the cash at the moment. I mean, the new administration has some ambitious plans, whereas we could tempt, you know, if they start managing the project, it will probably become obvious to them as the project is being managed, or we're giving assistance on project management, that there are other areas where significant progress will be made for minimal contribution from Borough Council funds. And I think we'd be in a stronger position if the Borough Council were just to take, in the first instance, a project management view, you know, take over the coordination of it, and see where it goes from there. Is Councillor Smith?
Thank you. Yes, I think there's a danger in presenting it as a request to money from Cabinet, which, as we know, will be difficult for them to do. We clearly want them to look into it and report on progress. And I wonder whether we need to phrase it more in those lines rather than a suggestion that either they provide a pump, which may or may not be a solution. I don't know. I've got even less technical knowledge than you in this subject, Councillor. Also, I think we certainly need to make a recommendation. We need to keep it on the agenda. We need to try and get some momentum back into this group, which seems not to be progressing very far. Whether the funding should go on the up, whether setting up this management team is the right solution, just don't know. We definitely need to get other parties involved on it. And if the other parties think that the council is just about to dig into its offers to pay for it, I guess everyone won't do. So we need to somehow encourage everyone to make a contribution to get this finished, and to remind everyone that it's not going to go away, and that we're going to keep asking these questions of highways, Anglia Water, whoever. And just
people who could well be responsible.
So we don't mention money, we don't mention the pump, we just mention coordination, which is perhaps the easiest and one of the most effective things which the Borough Council could contribute.
And I think we asked them to report to us within a reasonable timescale. So we don't want them kicking this in the grass.
Yeah. Is that a good course of action then?
Well, what we don't want is to create another talking shop. We've already got one at the moment, whereas it's not enough action, and it wouldn't be fair on us, because we asked the last administration for the money. So we're as a ward councillors, we're asking the new administration for the money as a temporary measure. Yeah, you can ask and get them to take charge, and we can go from there. But I am asking the money as ward councillors for the businesses down there who want the help, because they're the ones who are suffering, and all the car owners. But I think where we should, Dennis, I agree on what you're saying, but I'd also ask for money. If you don't ask, yeah.
We are the scrutiny panel, and we're not the ward councillors. And I think it's quite fair that the ward councillors can approach Cabinet and say, look, chaps, put your hands in your pocket. This is a difficult issue, which the borough should be doing. From the point of view of the scrutiny panel, we are looking at a community issue which we feel is not being dealt with in the best way. And we are making a suggestion there is a better way of dealing with this problem in terms of procedure and operations of the council, which is that this informal group headed by Will Quince should now be sort of strengthened, if not taken over, by project management skills being put in by the Borough Council to expedite the project.
I would agree with what you've just said, but I lean towards where Councillor Lilly is coming from, because he wants some direct action on that surface water at the moment. And so perhaps the compromise could be that we do ask if the Borough Council can be a project lead on this and help identify the money. So not actually explicitly ask, but just to help identify, and that might be a joint initiative.
It's all resources from all the experts needed in the right place, right time to make it happen.
With a report back here would 6 months be appropriate?
Yeah.
I don't know what. Asking them, we want them to come back to say, we've set up a group, it's doing this, we've getting contributions from A, B, and C, boom, boom, boom. So that will take a bit of time, but what do you think is reasonable?
I mean, looking at what's been happening with the town fund deal lately, I mean, making some public realm improvements outside St Nicholas Square sounds like an easy thing to do, but I know firsthand we're supposed to have shovels in the ground there in April, and it's now July. So I actually think it would. Councillor Smith is, I think, probably being fair to officers actually, and I think I would probably feel comfortable giving officers a bit of latitude so they can do the job comprehensively, rather than feel that they're rushing it just because we want a quick result. It's still within your municipal year, Councillor Lilly. So as long as it's 6 months, you can claim the glory. But I think you're making a good point.
Okay, do we have the views of the panel sufficiently captured for a recommendation to the Cabinet tomorrow?
Yes, I think so, Mr. Chairman.
Good, okay. Now you have your 1 minute, which we haven't given you, Mr. Chilvers.
Thank you. I got the sense that you've gripped the seriousness of the problem. What you don't want is it going into the long grass. The council should put some money on the table. Shouldn't be the only provider. And don't forget, well, I read a few days ago, Anglian Water just posted massive profits. There's money there to be had. Get after it.
Thank you for your contribution. We now move to item 16. No, yes, 16 on page 185. Move forward a bit. 185. Where we have there was concern raised about the bus services, and the panel asked a summary of the two previous occasions when we've had bus operators come and talk to us, which many of us felt was quite an unsuccessful activity. But nevertheless, before deciding what we were going to do about this issue, we wanted to review what had been done in the past, and we have that report from Howell this evening. First, we have your say on bus services in the borough.
Yes, scrutiny. Difficult scrutinising things which you don't have any power over, really, isn't it? I attended one of the early bus review scrutiny sessions. The service providers talked up their services, gave assurances, painted a rosy picture, and they left the committee. I got the impression they left the committee quite impressed. Only one outfit, that being the Panther buses, rubbished the chronic bottleneck and provision at Osborne Street. The rest obviously probably want to upset the county council who was sitting there. Then along came COVID and public transport was shunned, and still not back to the old numbers. I use the bus when it suits us to get into town. Remember bus pass with my mask at the ready. I wouldn't if I didn't. Now, the so-called bus, I was at the so-called bus station at 3 o'clock Wednesday. The jam where the buses sat there, screwed up, tight, seemed to go on forever. Nothing could be pulled in or out from the curb. It's a regular occurrence. So is there anything to be done? Not Colchester Council's problem, technically, but of course people turn to you. You get blamed for everything. But where does the council stand on the bus station? Is it standing aside, or is it lobbying for an improvement? We have a transport section allegedly. I don't know what what are they doing? They should be on this case. I'm looking forward to the local plan. Colchester Council planners and Essex County Council managed to persuade the inspector that the new residents on the Wick will opt for sustainable transport. A lot of emphasis was put on that as being the solution, and he agreed to stringent conditions. Meanwhile, services have been cut. So I'm asking the scrutiny panel to check with the borough and county what powers you actually have to ensure that a comprehensive service will be provided, and that the bus companies won't just say no. Because if they don't step up, the Wick development fails by them not complying with one of the crucial conditions. Maybe not a bad thing. But I suggest that Colchester Council don't really have the power, and residents will resort to their cars to get to work somewhere on the other side of town, and up goes the pollution. I think it's time scrutiny got stuck into the subject on a wider context and not just be dazzled by the super duper rapid transports plan for the Eastern Government community. So what say you? Is this another job for a cabinet portfolio holder?
Thank you for your interesting questions. Colleagues, are there any comments on on the reports of what we've done in the past and whether there is any mileage. The question initially was whether there was any mileage in calling the bus operators in for a further presentation, given the singular lack of progress that previous presentations made. But of course, Mr. Childers touched on subjects which perhaps go a little further than that, which is the role of bus transport in the context of the local plan and the strategic plan for the borough or the city. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Well, as usual, Mr. Childers talks a lot of sense. Particularly when you talk about us scrutinising something that we have no power over. We could call the bus companies in. What can we do? We can't set up our own bus company. We did that a long time ago, but that failed due to competitive practices coming in. Would there be any real benefit in doing that? We know that transport is key to ensuring our environmental credentials and the success of our tackling the environmental issues, because we need to get people out of cars onto public transport, and we need a good, reliable and cheap public transport system. And we have none of those at the moment, and the situation continues to deteriorate. But what we can actually do as a scrutiny panel on that subject, like you, Mr. Chair, I struggle with looking at the other issues where we can, like the flood, make an impact. I think there's possibly not scope for us to do anything worthwhile at the moment, apart from have a talking shop with the bus companies.
I'm ever the optimist, and I know Councillor Smith tries to keep me firmly nailed to the floor, but I think we can stretch things just a little. I mean, our responsibility is to look at the effective way in which the strategic plans for the borough, which includes the local plan and the transport section in the local plan, are being delivered. And there are some big ticket projects going on in the council at the moment, which have a degree of relevance. First of all, there's a lot of money tossing around on levelling up. And if ever there was an area to level up, it's per bus service that we have, say, from Ambrose Avenue into town centre, one bus every 10 minutes, compared with the 2 buses a day we get from Fordham Village into the town centre. And if you take the afternoon bus, book a room at the George, because the return doesn't go until the following morning. So this is an area of sort of generalised levelling up, where the council has a commitment to equality and has funds coming in. Perhaps not, we don't have at the moment, but we can anticipate funds are going to come in for levelling up. We also have the town centre master plan, which services have relevance, unless we're going to argue that the advent of scooters, buses will no longer be required at all. But again, we have an issue where the reason we have so many cars coming into the centre is that the people who live in the town centre walk, the people who live just a little way out come in on their scooters or their bicycles. But there is still a huge swathe of area housing people where there is no way of getting into the town centre at the moment, other than coming in by bus. And if the town centre master plan wants to reduce the dependency on cars, improve the air in the town centre by reducing pollution and so on, it has to tackle the issue of how then are people going to come into the town centre. Because if they don't come to the town centre from the outskirts, the town centre is going to continue to decline, and those areas that you can get to by car will continue on the tendency. So these are major strategic issues which are at the heart of several of the major planks of strategy which the council is looking at. And My personal view is that we should be asking Cabinet to link in the issue of the bus services in the borough with these strategic issues we're looking at. Now, so I think the options we have are quite clear again. We can take Councillor Smith's view that this is a hopeless case and never be able to do anything about it. Or we can hope that there might be a glimmer of light in the tunnel and that the major policies that are going on, in some way, we can link in improved bus services in a way that's not wholly clear at the moment, and certainly with existing legislation. But you know, we may form a passenger transport authority with a couple of other neighbouring cities or boroughs, and that would give us extended powers to control the buses. And it may be that issues like that may be considered as part of the wider strategic plan for levelling up or the town centre master plan. So I don't want to give up at this stage. And Councillor Smith may well say, "I told you so." It was hopeless from the start. But I think we should have one more go of this. But rather than calling in the bus companies, say to Cabinet, there are some issues here which are at the heart of the council strategy and should be taken on board by Cabinet. I don't know whether there's any support for that type of a approach. Councillor Smith.
So, Chair, I feel that's slightly misunderstood. I was certainly not keen on calling bus companies because that seems to be a wasted exercise. What you seem to be suggesting now is a much broader strategic bit of scrutiny, looking at the whole transportation issues in the town centre, which is I would suggest, what larger and different concept to what I would say we shouldn't do. And if you want to do that larger strategic, I think that is something that would well fit within the scrutiny role. It would, though, I think, be a very substantial piece of work.
So how do other members feel? I mean, is this an area where we should take a punt, whether we can get Cabinet to score this?
In the past, we have actually had a few minor successes. It's taken a while, but for example, the ticketing system change where you don't have to buy a new ticket if you get in a Riva bus and switch to a first bus. That's changed now, so you get a Colchester wide ticket. It seems crazy, but cashless payments are now in, so you can pay your card, as Essex for some reason was 20 years behind the rest of the country. So there were some benefits, and there were some bus companies that were clearly uncomfortable coming here and questioned about their poor service. The issue, as you say, is we can't really do much about it. We can, but there's a question of no one else is holding their feet to the fire. Essex County Council not doing anything, giving contracts to these hopeless companies that, as you say, in rural villages are just ignoring them. We have the ability to do that here and stepping up to the plate. Buses are have a huge impact to the people of Colchester, so I feel we do have reasons to talk to them. I'm happy to go down the Cabinet route if others feel that's the right route to go. As far as master planning goes and the bus station, I know that that is being considered in future master planning, so that will probably come to us anyway, an item. So it's kind of a complicated one, really. I'm happy to be led by others, but I think it is worth bringing them in. My big issue at the time when I said we should look at it was the bus cuts that have come in primarily from first buses, because they were the ones who said they were changing the names of the routes as a disguise to cut the routes. And that's a real concern that Essex just let it happen. As you say, our villages have been cut off from that. That was my big concern, but happy to hear from others.
Yes, thank you. I actually agree with everything you said, and I'll go a bit further on that. And to give you an example about what the decimation of the services to rural areas, Kalamanskargi bus from North Station Road, return ticket to Borough, £4.20. although that's cheaper compared to what they've got now. So now that they scrapped that, so to get a bus directly to Roe Hedge from North Station Road, I have to tap and click, and I pay £1.50 from North Station Road to the George Hotel. The bus then changes to a Roe Hedge bus, just like Mr. Ben's, Taylor and thing. I then have to pay another fee, a second fee, tap and collect, and that's £1.50. And then when I've done my stuff, which usually take hours, get the ticket back to Osborne Street by the bingo hall, £1.40. So if you do your maths right, that's way behind the return ticket they had before. You're over £5 now. But then to get back to North Station Road, I have to get a bus, and that's £1.40. So as you can see, and they've scrapped the half-hour service, so now it's an hour service and that. So they've actually made it worse for people to actually use buses. Now we going back to what you were saying, we had a parking strategy here worked out through the parking partnership, the wonderful Richard Walker and the officers involved in that. It would only work really if the bus services would work with us. So we could offer special cut price deals for the town centre, but it would rely on the bus services offering cheaper family tickets and discounted tickets for people, instead of going the way that I've just described. There should be a cheaper way of doing it. And in that strategy, it was included in there that that the council could operate a shuttle service by buying electric vehicles. Bus companies would no longer travel around the town centre. They would come up North Hill, a two-way situation. They'd have bus stops on Head Street and along on either side, by the cinema and by the old Denman site. They would go down Osborne Street and out into the other area through St Paul's. And the electric services operated by the council would operate around the town centre with one fee pay that would operate and travel people from backwards and forwards, so they connect to the buses that operate through the bus services. I suggested this to the first bus boss, and he went, "Oh, we wouldn't want to be cut out of that. We'd like to do that because we're doing something similar in Southampton, and which has been a success, where they've changed all the bus routes and they've enabled proper discounts to come in. So it is worth looking into, and it is worth recommending to the cabinet, like you've said, that we could look into something like that, whether we run a shuttle service ourselves. And now the question is, could you push those shuttle services out into areas like Barnwell, which had the buses cut, and would say old age pensioners would maybe pay £1 to go into the town centre rather than use the bus fare? That's the issue. One fee for everybody, but it is radical and it is different. And if we did that, and I think you're going along the lines of just pushing you into the more radical area, that we need to look at something different for the town and for the rural areas as well. And I think we need to start by doing let me finish on Nottinghamshire, who are fantastic. They introduced the car parking strategy up there. They introduced a city-run bus service to run alongside a proper car parking strategy. I know when I was a holder, I spoke to the guy who was running Richard Walker for Colchester. We took their advice and based on that, Leicestershire have now done the same thing. Why can't we? Thank you, Dennis.
Okay. Well, you could get a scooter from Roe Hedge for £1, couldn't you? Yeah. Wouldn't pay £1.50. I can get a scooter for £1.
It's £6.20.
Right.
Get a car.
Good. So, do we wish to recommend to Cabinet that they do a piece of work on in the context of the major policies that they're looking at already? Is that agreed? Do we have a form of wording which would capture our views? We've got a lot to.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Cabinet is going to be disappointed tomorrow.
I'll have a very busy morning tomorrow, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I just?
So you have a minute.
Yeah,
Mr.
I'll withdraw after this. Let's be quite clear. The cost of fares has a negative impact on the footfall in the town centre. If you've got two adults, two kids coming in from Mile End, that's an area I know fairly well, the cost of that and the hassle, well, why would you use the bus? You know, you'd either drive in and park in for a couple of hours in St Mary's, or head off to Stane Park at Aldgate. So there does need to be some creative thinking on fares. As far as the pensions and something, if it was a special service, a better service, a different one, I'm quite sure that pensioners would chip in with £1. They'll moan to start with, but actually, you know, the majority of us could afford to pay something anyway. Don't need completely a complete free bus pass. But I'm glad cost has been.
Yep. Thank you for your. Sorry, we've kept you so late this evening. There's nothing good on television, so. Okay, the final item on the agenda is the work programme. Owen, can you just run us through where we are in the work programme at the moment? Then we've got new items which they have to be added.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So we'll go away and draft scheduling for those new items that the panel have requested tonight. I recommend our next meeting on the 16th of August. We've got some fairly meaty subjects there, draft strategy being one, and also an update on the town deal projects. So I'd probably advise that we keep that without having any additional items on that one. As you can see, we've cancelled the portfolio holder briefing that had been scheduled for that at the request of panel. As Councillor Lissamore's point was taken on board, that perhaps it was too early for portfolio holders who are getting their portfolios to come in at that point. I would just draw the panel's attention to the fact we do need panel to let us know what specific issues it wishes to do deep dives on with portfolio holders' attendance, so we can identify when we can schedule those for the relevant portfolio holders. So I'm quite happy to take suggestions there or any questions on what we've got on the work programme.
Okay, if we can look at what this evening we identify some new issues some which to be placed in provisionally in the work programme, some will we just presumably get a report back. There's the Haven flooding where, if Cabinet is mindful, we'll need to have another report on that. There's a matter of 106 reports, which we're going to ask for an officer's report on. That needs to come back on the agenda at some stage. There's the work item on family affiliation in the housing allocations, where again we're looking for a report before we discuss that further. And there's the matter of alumno, where we heard the presentation earlier on. I think there was a feeling around the table that we need to get this on the work programme, but as we identified, this is not a done deal yet on alumno, and there are still delicate considerations going on, and until the final deal has been thrashed out, it could be difficult to do a of scrutiny. It would inevitably, if we did it at the moment or in the next month or so, it would inevitably be done in private session. And I believe that we scrutinise the matters on behalf of the residents of the borough. I mean, we are their champion, and to have to do a piece of scrutiny in private session would really be self-defeating. So, from the work programme point of view, Alumno and the way the Alumno project was managed should be appearing on the work programme. But I think we need to take advice from the portfolio holder and the monitoring officer as to when that is likely to be. I mean, hopefully it would be within this year, but I suppose it really depends on just how progress happens. It could be tied up in a week, it could be tied up in 18 months. So that's a little more of a difficult one because but I guess we probably need to slot it in somewhere towards the tail end of the work programme. And these might not be substantive items, it might just report back to see whether we want to consider the issues that we've been looking at, those 4 issues, in greater detail at a time on the work programme. Councillor Law.
Thank you, Chair, and forgive me, this may not warrant a substantive item. I defer to your experience and to the others around the room, but an item that I feel that we should consider bringing here in the municipal year is of air quality. And I say that because I'm personally encountering a phenomenal amount of the Deliveroo Just Eat drivers who are parking all over our pavements and leaving their engines idle while they wait to get food to distribute to people, their customers. And I know that really good work is being done in the borough around getting people on electric bikes and electric cargo bikes. And I know that those guys are trying to tap into some of the delivery drivers who frankly are in a better physical state than I am. And if I can cycle 6 miles home to Nayland tonight, they ought to be able to cycle with a pizza on the back for their customers more. But I think that the air quality issue is so serious. We are seeing constant engines idling because it's hot outside. And it's not good enough, and it's really not good enough on North Station Road outside the school and other schools, which I know is a countrywide problem. But I wonder what the room feels about looking at air quality and engine idling in the urban centre.
Well, Chairman's going to be bureaucratic, I'm afraid. To raise a new item, you can't do it under work programme. It has to be done under 9A or B of the meeting. So sorry. I mean, it's an issue. I think we all agree that we have procedures, we have process, and a scrutiny panel.
Forgive me, I'm new on the panel.
Yes, we should be the leaders in showing the council how work is done properly in accordance with the rules. So bring that forward under section 9 of the next meeting. So if we can just come back to the 4 items, newish items, are you happy what we're going to do and when we're going to include those, if just as placeholder where we receive a report?
If the panel's happy, I feel like I should say I've got recorded a recommendation for a future item to look at the Lang and Ho Trail to see if that worked with regard to like housing. Yes, thank you, Councillor Smith. So if we need to add that as well, would you be happy for me to, obviously I really need to talk to the relevant officers to look at timescales for producing reports. If I then come back to yourself, Mr. Chairman, and the group leads with a provisional laying out scheduling of those items, and then we can talk that over and then get that formally agreed at the August meeting, if you'd be happy for us to do that. And
it may well be that with 3 or 4 new items added in the annual programme that we will need an extra meeting so that we're not at 11 o'clock. But I mean, we don't know. The Cabinet may well say, push off when we ask them to do some of these things tomorrow. So it may evaporate at that point, or they may say, good run with this and do it all yourselves and come back when you've got something to recommend, which would complicate matters in considerably. So we've identified the items. There needs to be some officer discussion. We even know when we're going to get a briefing paper on some of these. There'll be a lot of officer discussion on no, ensure that we don't cross across any or impede any sensitive commercial negotiations that are going on. And can we tie that up as the changes to the work programme for this evening? And we'll be seeing the outline schedule coming back to us over the course of the next few weeks, as has been promised. If there's no other business, I will declare the meeting closed and thank you for your attendance this evening. Thank you.